got Dr. Stephen Greer in. Thank you so much. I mean, all you could say about you is wow. You know, especially the movie Unacknowledged. That's the one. You know, I watched that because a lot of us are always looking for more than the farmer, the guy that saw this in the street, whatever. And then you watch that and you go, wow, this is proof.
Right.
And everyone I had sent that to or referred to watch that, they said, this is what I've been looking for.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, you're originally an ER doctor.
Yeah, it was a lot easier. Shootings and stabbings and car wrecks and heart attacks are simple compared to taking on this. I mean, this has been an ultra marathon for 33 years. I've been working in this. Yeah.
And I got to ask you this before we get into everything else. Mm-hmm. What do you think happens when we die?
Well, interestingly, in 1973, when I was 17, I did die. I got very sick, had near-death experience. And we were raised devout atheists. We didn't believe in anything. But I had an amazing experience dealing with sort of the universality of the consciousness that's within us. And it changed my whole perspective on life, on death, on what's following. And there is. I mean, there's continuity of your conscious existence outside the span of your physical body. And that was something that certainly I was taught. My parents were humanistic, reductionistic, scientific, didn't believe in anything if it didn't go into a test tube. But that experience proved to me, in fact, that we do continue on. And that was a very hopeful experience in many ways. It was very beautiful, actually. There was nothing negative about it, except I was deathly ill. But then I got better. I never did see a doctor.
Probably the reason why you got better.
Well, no, it was just we were so poor. I mean, I was in high school, had my own apartment, and I was raised in kind of a two-room shack with no central heat and a kerosene heater on the floor in the hallway in North Carolina. And I've worked my way through high school, college, med school. So the idea of going to a doctor, unless your arm had just gotten chopped off, was, you didn't do it. So, as a doctor now, I realize, wow, there's so many things that happened when I was young that just never got treated, But I did learn that we're not, this is, interestingly, that was the gateway to me studying the extraterrestrial issue. And the reason I want to connect the dot is that what I discovered about what's called the science of consciousness and field consciousness later, of course not at that moment, was that it's the ultimate aspect of what they call the entangled universe, where every point in space and time is connected to every other point in space and time. And that the understanding of the science of consciousness, which is best elucidated in the ancient Vedas in Sanskrit, that explains a lot about extraterrestrial technologies and how they communicate and how they appear and disappear. Because they're not using what we're using here is at the speed of light. But if you're from the Andromeda galaxy, which is 5 million light years, it'd take you 5 million years to get a signal there, 5 million years to get one back. 10, right? Or it's 2.5 million. So it's 2.5 there, 2.5 back. 5 million years. So you're going to say, "Hey, honey, how you doing?" And 2.5 million years later, she gets the signal. So I realized that this was sort of the Rosetta Stone of understanding what we're dealing with this entire issue. It's very complex, advanced physics, actually, what's called trans-dimensional physics. But most people focus on, kicking the tires of a UFO, which is fine. They do have physical, when they're 3D, they're 3D. But most people don't stop to think about how are they communicating? How are they getting from point A to B? Through the universe, which is vast. They're using a type of physics that involves, on a large scale, entanglement, where Einstein called it the spooky effect, where, the same particle could be in two places at the same time. We're now dealing with civilizations that have mastered the ability to actually go from point A to B without straight line, but basically A and B are right here. They're right there.
They're cutting that gap.
They're cutting that gap. And it's called trans-dimensional physics, and very advanced physics, classified, most of it. But that experience, near-death experience, it then led to my study of the science of consciousness, sort of opened a whole subject up to me in a way I could understand it. So your question is not spurious.
Yeah, and when like with Graham Hancock, and you start looking at the past, however many thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago it was, whether they were on psychedelics or not, whatever you want to call it, how do they have drawings of a UFO, just like we're seeing now?
Well, that's easy to understand. I mean, people, it doesn't have to be a psychedelic because the ultimate ability to obtain information is through field consciousness. So in a meditative state.
Yep.
So after I'd had this near-death experience, I started to learn how to do meditation. And that led me to eventually, before I was a doctor, being a meditation teacher. Now I'm dating myself here. This is 1973, 74. So I'm a 19-year-old guy, 20-year-old guy gallivanting around the world setting up meditation centers, and people like Louise Hay was a student of mine, and all these sort of people. But I think what I discovered from studying that area was that you can enter into a state. This is what the CIA remote viewing programs are. And the Monroe Institute has a similar, where you go into a quiet state of consciousness, and you can actually, if you master this, intend to see through field consciousness a remote place in space or time. So native peoples, early people, what we call primitive people, who actually were not, I think, were primitive, had an understanding of this innately. It was part of their practice. Like the Aboriginals in Australia had dream time, where they could literally, in the dream state, lucid dream state, communicate, see what's going to happen tomorrow, et cetera. It's just part of their culture. My grandmother was, on my dad's side, was Cherokee, and the Cherokee had that tradition also, it turns out. So it turns out all humans that are awake have the ability to be just aware of the consciousness field, and through practice can then see a remote place. So I think when you look at these ancient portrayals, even star systems like the Dogon tribe in Africa, how did they see that what we didn't see until the Hubble telescope was up there, right? So they probably a combination of things. They probably had contact with extraterrestrial civilizations, but they also had an innate ability, I believe, to see through this field consciousness, this expanded state of consciousness, remote places and remote times. So it explains a great deal. But of course, that gets poo-pooed by mainstream science because it's something that doesn't fit the reductionist linear paradigm. And yet quantum, let's talk about this. Quantum, you get into quantum physics, and Erwin Schrödinger, who was the first quantum, well, he was particle wave theory, 1908, said the total number of minds in the universe is one. It's a singularity. So that's the real singularity. Hey, all you AI guys listening. So that's the ultimate understanding of what the singularity really is. It's this unbounded consciousness field. And interstellar civilizations have had to master that at the physics level, where something that would be like our phone, instead of using electromagnetic signals at the speed of light, it's interfacing with quanta of thought, intentional thought, that precisely. And this has been known in classified projects in the CIA and aerospace industry since at least the 1950s.
And that's what I was saying. I agree with you. And like you said, people go, yeah. No. You go all the way back, and it's, right. You could call it telepathic, whatever you want to say. Yeah. But I believe that those civilizations weren't so worried about this and that and that. They were more worried about one within the universe, within nature. And then through that, I think that they were able to break through. And that's why when you see some of these drawings in the caves and all this other stuff, looks really similar to some of the stuff we're seeing now.
Oh, it's identical. But also there were contact events that happened through human history. And I think the evidence for that is quite strong. I mean, you have carbon-dated drawings of things that look exactly like what we call a modern UFO.
Exactly.
From 5,000 years ago in France and in India that have been found. They're not hoaxes. So then the question becomes, well, if they've been around since early human civilization, what's going on all of a sudden now or in the modern era? And I tell people, remember this date, August 1945. We've detonated the first atomic bomb, bang. And we need to talk about this because this is the crux of the mystery of the last 75 years, is when we crossed that threshold, two things happened. One, a big red flag went over Earth saying, these primates are about to blow the whole thing up here. Or, I mean, humans are 98% gorillas, chimpanzees. So you're in a situation where we're at a level of ending life on Earth with those kind of weapons. And then we go to hydrogen or thermonuclear weapons, which are hundreds of times more destructive. The other thing that's not talked about, this is classified, and this was not known by Edward Teller and Oppenheimer, but when you detonate an atomic bomb, the pulse, everyone knows an electromagnetic pulse. It can knock out your power grid, whatever. What's not talked about and what wasn't known is that there's another attendant pulse that's known as a scalar or longitudinal signal. So think of light as a wave like this, the light in this room. And a laser is coherent light. It's all, say, green or it's all red band or whatever. A longitudinal or scalar electromagnet is a point that goes out in a straight line, multiples of the speed of light. So those signals, when the burst of that went out, it actually kind of disrupted the fabric of the universe for interstellar civilizations for both communication and travel. Boom. This is why we had ET craft over all of our nuclear facilities. A Disclosure Project witness Colonel Diedrichson, full bird colonel. We have him, if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see his testimony that every single nuclear installation and weapon storage area, et cetera, was surveilled by these ET vehicles, and that's what they're called. They're not called UFOs, they're ETVs. And the ETVs were surveilling these because there was a very huge risk to not only us that they recognized, but to them. Mm-hmm. And then you have to combine that with us moving into the early days of the space race. And everybody knows my uncle worked on the lunar module, Northrop Grumman. It was Grumman back then that put the first man on the moon. Most young people I talk to don't know what the lunar module is. It's in the museum in the Smithsonian Air and
How about
Space.
that? His uncle did that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he worked on that critter. And that little thing, it looks like a spider landing. But,
Open.
yeah, cool. But as a little boy, that was kind of cool having an uncle work on
hell
that.
Yeah.
But I thought to myself, what happens when you begin to study this area of physics, having retrieved extraterrestrial material in the 40s, and then you have classified aircraft that aren't using jets and rockets? Now, my uncle worked on the jet propulsion and the rockets for the Apollo. But within Northrop and within Lockheed Skunk Works, there are projects that work on this other stuff. That's what's going to be revealed on June 6th. A new movie coming out. Wait for it. The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. So we're going to pull the curtain back on a whole century of these technologies, all the way back to Tesla to now, that have been suppressed and sequestered into classified projects that literally would save the planet. I'm not exaggerating. People use that way too much, but literally would save the biosphere and end poverty within 20 years on the planet. But the problem with these technologies is that not that they can't be understood by science, but they are understood. Maybe not at professors at Harvard because they're not read into classified sciences and technologies. But the reason it's all secret is that the sort of fascist corruption of I call them the petro-Nazis and the big moneyed interests. And we're not talking Elon Musk with $200 billion. Nobody cares about $200 billion. We're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars that would basically go the way of all flesh. And that's what's been forestalled. So we have 100 years of environmental destruction and of social retardation, our whole society being held back because of this kind of corruption. And we have to call that out for what it is. It is corruption. It's understandable if you know what's behind the secrecy. Now, I'll tell you, the first time I briefed the CI director from Bill Clinton, this was 30 years ago this coming December. And his first question, it wasn't, are UFOs real? He knew they were. Not from anything he got as CI director. He was denied access. So was the president. But I was flown up there to explain this to them because I had been researching it for some time and had family connections into this problem. And he basically said, they won't tell me anything, but what I want to know is why is it that secret where it's deep black? It's not just a black project, it's deep, deep black. And I explained, look, if this comes out, it's not only people are going to realize we're not alone in the universe, but But they're going to realize we don't need ExxonMobil. We don't need oil, gas, coal, nuclear power. We don't need surface roads. We don't need power plants and transmission lines, because you're going to have something that fit on a fraction of this table that'll run your house or your building, pulling energy out of the quantum vacuum or zero-point energy field. We can get into this. But that is something that's real. It was proven to exist in the 50s by Professor Casimir, Casimir. And most people don't realize the kind of power behind maintaining the status quo, not when you're talking about something disruptive like a new cell phone or an internet app or something, but like a Lyft or Uber or something. Oh, that's disruptive. I said, no, that's not disruptive. That's just a taxi.
That's some competition.
It's some competition to the taxi cartel. But now we're talking about something where you're talking the entire basis of our economy and industrial foundation has to be retired and a new one built. So it's like rebuilding Europe after World War II and the Marshall Plan times 10,000.
This episode is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Breaking news, Manscaped now sells beard products. That's right, they are once again revolutionizing men's grooming with brand new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. From a beard trim to a fresh shave, the technology behind Beard Hedger Pro Kit allows you to shave your signature beard look. Now you can finally use Manscaped products to make your drapes match your carpet by going to Manscaped.com and using code MSCS Media for 20% off and free shipping. No one likes a weird beard, so say goodbye to all the stubble trouble with Manscaped's Pro Beard Kit. It all starts with the Beard Hedger. This thing is a monster of fixing faces. First off, this cordless trimmer has a rotary wheel that gives you 20 hair cutting lengths, all with one guard. No more messing around in drawers, this color one, that color one, all with one guard. Plus, it's waterproof, so you can shave in the shower and avoid all that hair in the sink. The Pro Kit doesn't end there, though. First, there's the beard shampoo and conditioner. You need to remember your hair is different. Next, Manscaped's beard oil. Cap it off with beard balm. The Pro Kit also comes with 3 different gifts: a beard brush, comb, and scissors to ensure your beard is ready to impress. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code MSCS Media at Manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping at Manscaped.com. Use the code MSCS Media. Manscaped Beard Hedger, 1 stroke, 1 guard, 20 lengths. Link is in the description below. This episode is sponsored by ZBiotics. What is ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic? The ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic is a genetically engineered probiotic you drink before drinking alcohol to avoid that rough next morning and get back to living your life. PhD scientists invented it because they know the real problem is not dehydration. It's a toxic byproduct of alcohol, and ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic is the only product that breaks it down. Just remember to drink responsibly and plenty of rest too. Every time I have ZBiotics before drinking, I'm amazed at how good I feel the next day. ZBiotics is a must-have for me because it means I'm still going to make my daily workout even if I have a few drinks the night before. That's important to me. You can get ZBiotics for 15% off your first order using my code MSCS Media at checkout. I recommend getting the 6-pack. That's what I got. It's a great deal. You have a couple extra to share with friends. Go to zbiotics.com/MSCS Media. That's Z as in zebra, biotics, BIOTICS.com/MSCS Media, or scan the QR code on the screen right now and get 15% off your first order. You will not be sorry. Link is in the description below. And it all makes sense. We had Robert Beto in.
Mm-hmm.
Who, do you know Robert Beto?
I don't know him.
He works with Elon Musk, but he's big on the quantum and all that. And he went to an island. Mm-hmm. And this is to prove your point. And this is proof. And it's also in your documentary. He went to an island just because he wanted to see if it worked. He powered an entire island for free with water.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Do you know what they did a year later? What was it, a year and a half later?
Yeah, a year later.
They blew it up. They just blew it up. The whole island had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
He powered the whole thing and blew it to shreds.
Did he build that system?
Yeah, he did.
Have him contact me.
Yeah, I will.
Now, here's the crux of another problem. As Einstein said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. What I have done over the last 32 years of dealing with these sort of inventors is track all the predictable errors they make and they're serious errors. They think that they can patent it or keep it secret or keep it small the way you would when you just have a big breakthrough that you're going to monetize through the normal financial system and investment banking system or venture capital. And that's true for everything else. It is not true for this, because the corrupt interests, both corporate and governmental, that you're up against, that buzzsaw, is more than anyone can imagine. So the only way to do this is to get it, prove it, first of all, because most of these new technologies, people claim they have something. It's a free energy, blah, blah. It's mostly a fraud. I'm a big skeptic, by the way, about 99% of stuff out there. But the ones that are real, that's going to instantly be on the radar of the deeper part of the national security state, the deep black part. And it is not going to be allowed to get out. I don't care if you raise $1 billion. If you don't open source it, which means the plans for it, the schematics, all of it, is put out blockchain protected all over the world so the public has it and can reproduce it, at least at the first phase of this. It's never going to get out to see the public. And I've seen companies that have had $100 million in big breakthroughs in technologies. They've just gone, excuse my language, tits up, because they're never going to make it out of the cradle of the birth cradle to the public because of the power of, let's just call it special interest, whatever you want to call it, corrupt interest, special interest. You don't have to get so conspiratorial. It's not hard to understand. If you're sitting on several $100 trillion in oil reserves and commodities and what have you, you have a compelling interest to protect your own interests. You have a compelling reason. Unfortunately, it is destroying the planet, and it's causing. Right now, The Economist just came out with last year an estimate: 3 billion humans don't even have any energy to cook with, so they're cutting down the rainforests and desert shrubs. That's 3 out of 8 billion people literally have zero source of energy. Never mind, going to clean greenhouse.
Yeah.
Non-greenhouse energy, like my solar farm. I have a big solar farm in Virginia. It's the biggest one allowed by law. It won't run anything. When we had a snowstorm, power went out. We're there freezing our whatever.
Yeah.
So I tell people it's a great idea, but it ain't going to get us there. So the science and the physics behind how a UFO moves. Look at that. I always tell people. I was at in a SCIF recently, a secure compartmented information facility in Washington, and I said, "Look, let's play this." And we played this thing they call the Tic Tac. It got released a few years ago.
Yeah, the Tic Tac.
Yeah, when Unacknowledged came out. And by the way, when Unacknowledged hit 750 million views, that's when they stood up the disinformation crowd. A young man I had taught years ago named Tom DeLong and Luis Elizondo started TTSA, and it was all a counterintelligence operation, although Tom didn't know that. Tom DeLong didn't know that. But Elizondo is the master of disinformation at the Pentagon before he moved over there. And I had a CIA guy who's been friendly to what we're doing for 30 years going, whoa, watch out, heads up. They've just unleashed a master of counterintelligence and disinformation onto this because Unacknowledged hit those numbers. And it went viral. It had been on Netflix. Now it's on Amazon. You can see it anywhere, it's on Tubi, Pluto.
I bet you that's way over 1 billion. Plus pirated and everything else.
Well, most of it was pirated. I mean, if you look, of course, everyone thinks everyone in the world looks at a U.S. streaming site.
Oh, fuck that.
I know. It's most of the big. Yeah. The big is in, my biggest demographic following this is in Shanghai.
Yeah.
Which I've never even been to China. So I go, yeah, because I have people who can dig into the guts of the internet and find out where everything's happening. Yeah. But I think that what happened is that they decided we wanted to divert people, and they wanted to say, here's this thing, but we don't know what it is. What a bunch of nonsense. We do know what it is. It's made at the Lockheed Skunk Works. I have a photograph of the opening to the underground base where that thing is launched from.
Isn't that crazy?
And you're going to see it in the Lost Century on June 6th.
Can't wait to see it.
This thing's going to be chock full of that stuff. People are going to go,
yeah, we're going to go all through it in a minute.
Yeah, it's fun.
And the average person, they look at it and they go, oh, if it is a UFO, they don't want to tell the public because of religion. People won't handle it.
Oh, nonsense.
But after reading all your stuff, watching all your stuff, because, again, it's not just this guy said this, how you got these top people to talk.
Mm-hmm.
and on camera is amazing. I mean, congratulations, but it's undeniable. It's not just, okay, the society can't handle it. It's, if this comes out, now we know we have craft with this type of technology, the free energy, which we're going to get to.
Right.
And now all the work would completely change. Nobody starves. And I'm taking this right out of your documentary, but nobody was starves. I think the one admiral, I believe, he had said that this right here would turn the free energy in here would turn the entire ocean into steam.
Mm-hmm. There's enough energy in the amount of space in a cup, a coffee mug. The amount of energy there is that's why Tesla called it the infinite energy field. Although at that time he had not quantified it, he had just empirically, meaning direct observation, seen that you could set up a very high voltage system where suddenly you're getting more energy out than you have to put in. It's called overunity. And most physicists and scientists say that's violating the second law of thermodynamics. It isn't. Here's why. It's that they're not accounting for that 0-point energy field. Now, some people call that now the negative energy of the universe. There are all kinds of appellations and the flavor of the day or month from physicists. But the reality of it is it's been observed since the late 1800s and maybe before with Faraday, Maxwell, then Tesla. Now, it wasn't quantified, but it doesn't have to be quantified. We didn't know how digoxin, this medicine used for heart failure, worked until a few years ago. It was used for 100 years. It's from foxglove, the plant, and how it increased the strength, the contractile strength of the heart muscle when you're having heart failure. And it was literally used because it was observed how it worked for 100 years before we actually knew the precise mechanism of action. So as a scientist, I tell people, people get way off on their high horse, acting like we use stuff all the time that we don't quite know how that's working. But now we do. It's just that it went deep black secret, which is unfortunate because, and they claim it was for national security reasons. It was really because they wanted to protect the macroeconomic petrodollar industrial base.
Sounds like a business move to me.
Yeah, and not in the interest of the people of the United States or the world, frankly. So it's just not just the United States that the people have not been served by these policies. It's the whole planet has been hurt by them.
And now you're an ER doctor with a family, kids. I know you grew up around it, but what was that spark that made you resign from being an ER doctor, living like that, to go all the way into this to the point? And I can't tell you how many people said, is he really crying? And I said, when you were talking about you, an ER doctor, telling basically the head of the CIA what you know, and you're like, I'm an ER doctor.
What the hell am I doing?
What am I doing getting called here telling the head of the CIA what's going on? And not that I would have known anything before, but now I had doing the podcast and talking to heads of the CIA, like an ER doctor usually doesn't go meet with the head of and then with your family background, you're like, what? But what had sparked you to leave your job as an ER doctor? Because in your book, everything I read about it, it's not like you hated it.
Oh, no. I mean, I miss it. I still have dreams about doing it. And, if there's a bad accident, I'll stop and help. I like doing that, actually. I like helping people. But,
you're a good guy.
I think, the way, just to be clear, I was working full-time as an emergency doctor and raising 4 kids while I was doing this stuff briefing the CIA director. It was hard because I was wearing a whole lot of hats all at once, and eventually, once my kids got old enough, like launching into college, I went, well, but I have 4 daughters, wonderful kids. I decided now, and I'd done well enough financially with investments that I could back off of medicine to really devote myself to solving this problem. So it took a long time. It was many, many years of transition. It wasn't like it was just all at once. But the reason I finally did it was, if I can be blunt.
Sure.
So between 1992 and late 90s, I thought, well, if I put together what we called, for the Clinton administration and members of Congress, the best available evidence we can find as a civilian research group, then and a set of recommendations, executive orders that I drafted and things like this. Here's how we fix this. I thought, well, the president will do the right thing. I was very naive, honestly. I was in my 30s. And then I thought, well, he's not going to do it, because after we gathered all this stuff at Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch, the Rockefeller Ranch, and the Clintons went out there and basically they said, look, this is too dangerous. We're not proceeding any further. At least that's what I wasn't at that particular meeting, but that's what I was told happened. Then I said, well, let me pivot to Congress, because they're a co-equal branch of government, and other countries. So then I started globetrotting, going around, met with the head of the Ministry of Defense in the United Kingdom and other people like that, UN, Secretary General, what have you. But what I found was those folks didn't want to touch it either. It's like the third rail, zap. They were too afraid, and it was too controversial, and also it was too disruptive. So what I found with the political class was that for the most part, they wanted to play it safe. So that's when we started what's now known as the Disclosure Project, right, which I founded. And I started this whole global disclosure movement in the late 90s, but the event was in 2001 at the National Press Club. By the way, everyone stay tuned. We're going to do a Disclosure 2.0 on June 12th.
I have that in there too. Yep.
So that'll be exciting. But the reason that I decided I had to focus on this is because everyone else was dropping the ball, or more importantly, tossing the hot potato. You know, Kissinger was once reported to have said, this whole issue is the hottest potato in the universe, you know, boom. So I realized that it was going to need a team of people who were non-governmental folks to push the issue and push the issue and push the issue, which is now what we've been doing for 33 years. But I think it needed that kind of a heavy lift from people who were not politicians, which I'm not. Thank God. You know? I'd be the worst politician on earth because I'm too blunt and too honest, and I don't kiss ass. But, ouch, I should have said that. But
you're okay.
It's true.
Yeah.
But
they're assholes.
So, well, actually, there's some really good people right now trying to solve this problem.
I mean, in general,
mm-hmm.
The overall.
Well, ultimately, they have to get reelected, and every 2, 4, 6 years. And the other thing is that there are very powerful lobbyists and constituents who are going to come in and say, don't touch this one. Do you know how much money our campaign gets from energy and utilities and oil industry and whatever it is? So at a certain point, you're going to have to find a group of people who are going to do what's right for our civilization rather than what's right for the next campaign. Now, that's very difficult in politics, actually, but I think it can be done if the implications of this are understood. One of the things, I have this wonderful memory of being at the Rockefeller Ranch with Lawrence Rockefeller and some people back in September 1993. It was right before I was going to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where all the extraterrestrial machines were sent in the 40s and 50s. And I was going to do a briefing there and meet with the head of that division at the time. And so we had this gathering at the JY Ranch, which is near Jackson Hole, the Tetons. And one night late, Lawrence takes me out on the deck, and they have a statue. I think it's a Remington, a Native American on horseback, and beautiful. And the stars, you know, the Tetons are beautiful. Mm-hmm. And we started talking about this, and I said, he said, you know, Doctor, no aspect of life on Earth will be unaffected by the disclosure of this. So vast and so profound are the implications. And I said, yes, Lawrence, that's why it's so secret. It's not so secret because it's trivial or it's silly or it's little green men. It's because the entire way our civilization is structured and operating, and whether we have a future for my 12 grandchildren I have now or not is very much hanging in the balance of how this issue gets resolved.
I agree with you.
And most people don't realize that. Most people think it's just something interesting and it's entertaining for movies. But the secrecy around this is frickin' killing us.
And when you go like to the CIA and Bill Clinton's requesting it, and then he does nothing about it, and multiple other people, are they worried they're going to get killed, or are they worried that it's about getting killed?
Let me be blunt.
Yeah,
absolutely, yes.
How many people in your documentaries have said erased, killed, vanished?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've had that problem on my team. You know, before I put certain things in place, we had 3 people on my team who were assassinated.
Sorry to hear that.
But that ended in '98. That ended 25 years ago from things I don't want to talk about what we did. But the worst thing that will ever happen to this cabal of psychopaths keeping the secret is that they harm one hair on my head or any of the people I'm working with, and any of the whistleblowers and military people working with, then they're going to find out. And that is a threat.
And it seems like the whistleblowers, these top admirals, military people, astrophysicists, they're just fed up. They've just had enough, right? And that's why they're coming out.
I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who were, like 80 years old. And at the time I was like 40 or something. And they were crying on my shoulder going, we thought all of this would have been resolved in the 60s, when I was a teenager running around. I was born in 1955, and literally most of them thought by the mid to late 60s this would have all been resolved. It would have been disclosed. The technologies would have put in place, etc. But the same corrupt interest that kept it secret in the first place, and I mean to talk about this, at the end of World War II, are the people doing it now are basically, let's call them the descendants, lineage of that same thought and consciousness and worldview, a very centralized control, almost a totalitarian fascist view of a certain number of super elites behind the veil running things and pulling strings, and the rest of us, which are whatever, the plebeian masses, as I call myself. So I think that's a real problem. One of the things that was shocking to me when I a few years ago met with Senator John Warner, who's passed away last year. He was the Republican conservative Virginia Congress senator who was a pretty low to mid-level member of the committee keeping this secret with George H.W. Bush and a few other people. I know who they are, frankly, and most of them that are living. And what his son told me, John Warner IV, which I thought was very interesting. First time he says, my entire family are fascists. And of course, I thought he was joking because everyone uses that word like anyone you disagree now is a fascist, right? Or a conspiracy theorist or some other epithet or slur. And I said, no. He says, no, they were. I said, really? Yeah. He said, oh, yeah. And he told me about his grandfather. His mother's father was Paul Mellon. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Same family, Chris Mellon. We'll connect it up for you here soon. And he said that his grandfather, when towards the end of his life, had an extra martini that evening and told him, he says, look, at the end of World War II, Alan Dulles and myself and General George S. Patton went over to Germany and brought back an electromagnetic disc that was an early prototype of what the Third Reich was trying to develop as their secret weapon. We had the atomic bomb, but this is not a myth. So his grandfather said, oh, yeah, we brought that back. And that was not perfected, but that, and through Operation Paperclip, where they put a paperclip on some of these Nazi brilliant scientists, like Werner von Braun and Hermann Oberth, and all these people were brought into the United States, and they became the foundation of our intelligence and aerospace programs. But Paul Mellon, admittedly funded Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich up until the war started, and so did Henry Ford and Watson of IBM and Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's father.
You never hear about that part.
Well, this is not a conspiracy. These are fact-checkable.
No, I know, but
points.
I'm saying, like, you never hear about that.
No, you don't. Of course, they control, and these big interests control the media, and the media gets sanitized for anything resembling the truth. But this is the truth. And so he said that's why his grandfather said, look, we brought this over and to study it. Now, that a lot of people say then how much of the technologies that we see up there in the sky are ours versus deep black projects, they're known as in the trade ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, versus an actual extraterrestrial vehicle. And I suspect probably half to 80% of what people see are actually Lockheed Skunk Works, my uncle's company, Northrop Grumman, or Raytheon. Booz Allen Hamilton works on this, E-Systems. MITRE Corporation, C. Martin Company, we know who they are and where they're operating from. That's going to be revealed at the press conference June 12th. All of it.
And then the common question is always, well, if they really came here, why would they let us see them?
You're referring to the extraterrestrial vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a skeptic after talking to you. Before I would go back and forth. Bizarre got me pretty good, but you and Gary Nolan, he was the blood doctor that they went to. They went to Gary with the CIA or whoever went to him, and they said, "Hey, look, we need you to examine this." And he was like, "I'm a top blood doctor. What do you want with this?" So he started to get an interest in it, and what he had found, he narrowed it down to 100. Went down the hole, and he went to each 100 of them, interviewed them, then did a brain scan, and every single one of them had the white matter in their head. So then, as you're talking to him, it seemed at first like maybe they were trying to hurt somebody, and then he made a great analogy. If you walk behind a jet that's about to take off, what's going to happen? You're going to get fried. So if you get close to one of these, you're going to get fried. And all of them had that same white matter in their head medically.
But what he didn't understand was that those were encounters with the Lockheed and the Northrop ones. So here's the
That's why I brought that up.
Okay, here's the problem with people like Nolan. A little knowledge is a very dangerous thing. And that's a very little bit of knowledge. Because you can look at an effect, but what's the originating source? If you're not read into the fact that we have these technologies that have been somewhat reverse engineered, although it started earlier, we certainly were experimenting with very high voltage systems that created this lift anti-gravity effect. T. Townsend Brown in the 1920s was doing it. The Kowski-Frost experiment in Germany in the late 1920s, they were doing it. This all went very quiet. And then that human experimentation and physics combined in the 1940s with studying extraterrestrial vehicles. So now you have two areas of research that joined, and there were big leaps forwards. By October 1954, I know the precise date for a reason, which I'll get into, we had mastered gravity control, humans. So we have had...
54, you said?
1954.
Wow.
So we have had operational craft that simulate an alien or extraterrestrial vehicle since that date. And now the good news is that it's gone through many, many generations of development where it could be used for peaceful purposes if we ever became a peaceful civilization. The bad news is that they're in the hands of the worst corrupt enterprise ever to walk the earth. And at the same time, as the earth has been deprived of these technologies so that we can advance out of poverty and competition and wars, those technologies, if they're used for military purposes, would be fearsome and are. Which means that if you were to disclose that part of the technological spectrum, the things that fly, you've got a weapon delivery system. So now we're in a conundrum. So I think at this stage of social evolution on planet Earth, it would be unwise to disclose those sciences. It's wise to disclose the ones that simply would sit here and run your house, or you could put in your car and would run your car so it's not a fake Tesla. I call the ones we make now.
Yeah.
I call it, fake, because, and the reason I call them fake is that a real Tesla you would not have to plug in to a coal-fired power grid.
Right.
That browns out because so many people are driving electric cars in California. So I think that, a real Tesla would never have to be plugged in. It'd be pulling energy from the space around it. The
free energy, right?
Free energy, quantum vacuum flux space. And that's really what Tesla had until J.P. Morgan said, if we can't put a meter on it, it's not coming out.
If we can't bill for it,
yeah.
right?
So that's why I say that was 100 years ago. Here we are. Let's fast forward from the 1920s to 2023, and we're in the same conundrum.
No difference.
So how do we break this cycle, man? I mean, this is crazy. So what I'm saying is that it's time for us to move on. And but those technologies that fly, I mean, it would be risky if you had a terrorist in Mogadishu with that technology to deliver that over downtown D.C. in 1.2 seconds. I mean, we're talking things that are very fast. We're not talking about jets going at Mach 10 or something. I mean, we're talking or rocket planes. So we're talking really amazing stuff. So that does get into a legitimate national security problem, because the world has become more and more unstable, even though this deep black program has developed these technologies and perfected them. So how do we ever get out of this conundrum without a cataclysmic event happening? The environmental consequences of staying on this path is we could be looking at an extinction level event in 20 years. But the consequences of bringing this out without certain wise thinking behind it could also be very dangerous. But so the sweet spot of what needs to be immediately disclosed, I believe, are the quantum vacuum zero-point systems that would at least get us over the hump of global poverty, which leads to instability geopolitically, and also this huge environmental conundrum we're facing where the oceans are dying, all this stuff, which is not, it is absolutely true. People say there's no environmental problem, or they're shills for ExxonMobil. But so where they're correct is that just using solar panel and wind isn't going to fix it. It's too little, and the energy density isn't there, and it's too expensive. You know, if you tell a little village in Africa or India you have to put in a $3 million solar farm and what have you, you might as well say $3 trillion, right? They don't have that. So, but if you had something that could be mass manufactured, it's very inexpensive, that would run that whole village's power needs, so they could have clean water and electrification and refrigeration and eventually economic development. That is doable with current aid programs and current economic systems in place. So what we're wanting to do with this new film, The Lost Century, and how to reclaim it, is to sort of open up a pathway of understanding that these technologies are real. Here's the proof. Here's the science behind it. Here's how they were kept secret. But also, here's how we move them forward. Because what I find frustrating, a lot of people describe a problem is like Al Gore, The Inconvenient Truth, but he never describes an effective solution. And a solar farm and a wind farm ain't going to cut it for 8 billion people. I'm sorry.
Makes his wallet big.
Yeah, we just have a few seconds of battery storage capacity for wind and solar for the whole needs of 8 billion people right now. If you were to calculate the energy needs, it's like 75 seconds is all we have built. And you're not going to have enough, lithium-ion batteries and materials to do that for things that the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun isn't shining all the time, obviously. So the only way to get around that is a scientific solution. It's not a regulatory state solution, and it's not edicts from on high. It's allowing science and innovation to be unleashed from the corrupt interests that have suppressed it. But that can't happen if you're trying to work through the U.S. Patent Office. All right? That ain't going to happen. Right? Yeah. Right? And we have a document we're going to show in this documentary on June 6th that literally is, we blackened out the man's name, is a national security reply from the Patent Office to this guy. I have seen his device saying that this cannot be approved because of national security implications, blah, blah, blah.
Motherfuckers.
Yep. And so what national security implications? But it's a threat to ExxonMobil and to the oil emirates.
Oh.
Yeah, there's your national security. So let me translate national security for you. It's spelled O-I-L, oil.
Yeah. Can you pull up tab 2 quick? And then we'll get into the new stuff, and then we'll go back to the older stuff that I have questions about, because you've got to be on like repeat forever. Now, is this real?
Yes, this was Dr. Nolan and Bhattacharya at UCSF and at Stanford falsified the genetic sequence on this. I can say that definitively. We've had the best. Now, I am not a genetic or genome sequencer. I'm an emergency doctor. We don't know what it is. It is not a deformed fetus. This is what they claim.
That's what I saw. They put in the news that it's a person with a birth defect. And I said, okay, well, now I know it's something not from here. Yeah, it's just the fact that that's what they said, you know.
Well, it was worrisome when Gary Nolan received a $3.4 million, I think it was, grant from the Pentagon.
Jesus.
The month that I handed over the DNA material from this little thing. Now, what we do know is that
Dr. Greer, is it that small?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
It fits easily in my hands.
Holy shit.
Albeit I have big hands, but size 9 surgical glove.
Trying to tell us something?
Big hands. But so very, very small. It's the world's expert on bone malformations.
Wow.
Said that it was an equivalent word for the growth plates, the long bones, of a 6-year-old human. Now, we don't know. I don't know that this is extraterrestrial. I don't know if it's some species on Earth we've never seen. We know it is not what the cover-up artists and the hatchet job that was done, where they claim. Because I've had people go into all the data that they did publish, where they submarine this. 2 of the top geneticists in the world, one of whom worked with Watson and Crick, have taken it apart and said, this is a total fraud of what was reported publicly. Now, what it is, people say, oh, Greer says it's an alien. I have never said that. We do not know what this is. We do know it was found in an area where a lot of UFOs are seen, in the Atacama Desert in Chile. We do know that it is certainly unusual in its skeletal structure, because it's not just like one deformity. It's what we call global. The head, the ribs, everything is not keeping with a deformed fetus, which is what they eventually claimed it was. So I think that one of the frustrations I've had is the extent to which people who start out sincere get captured. It's just like they call it capture, like when the oil companies capture someone talking about the environmental problems. They get captured by very powerful interests to cover up things, and science goes out the window. So this is one of my big concerns with what's going on right now in Washington.
If that's from here, you got me fooled.
Well, of course, we don't know where it's from. All I'm saying is that the research on it got corrupted. And the result is that we don't know to this day. And we had a limited amount of genetic material. And the other question is, even though I still have genetic material from this that has not been given to Stanford, I won't say where it is, in a secure location.
Please don't. But
the problem is, who are you going to trust to do it?
Right.
Because at a certain point, what's your price? If you had something of great value to the intelligence community and you were threatened with Oppo research, maybe something on your taxes, maybe you have a brothel somewhere, I'm not saying you, or maybe, you need money. I know that in 1992, the head of Army intelligence and who had been Special Forces head, General Albert Stubblebine, personally offered me $2 billion to be quiet. And
$2 billion.
But also to join his committee. All right. And I wouldn't do it. He went behind my back to my wife, who epitomizes noblesse oblige, but she thought, oh, he's so nice. I said, well, of course he's nice. I mean, it's like devil speak with forked tongue, But that was a serious offer. And of course, I've never been interested in money, and I've wanted to have enough to support my family and, be comfortable. Because I grew up in terrible poverty. I didn't want to go back to that. Sure. But I've never cared about that kind of money. And so I'm not corruptible. But if you're someone who's corruptible, I met with a man in Phoenix back in 1993. He says, and this was 30 years ago, we have given at least 10,000 people $10 million or more each to secure their cooperation with the secrecy. And, of course, it was another attempt to get me to get pulled into that. And so you have to keep yourself really above reproach on that. And because if you actually have something that is of interest and could disrupt the status quo, there will be threats and there will be offers. There are carrots and sticks. And there are golden carrots and there are very big sticks.
This episode is brought to you by Let's Get Checked. Are you the man your father was? Recent studies have shown that men's testosterone levels have dropped substantially since the 1980s at about an average of 1% per year. Think about how old your father was when he was born. For example, if he was 30, your testosterone levels could be 30% lower than his. Low testosterone levels can have all type of health effects on men. It can affect your mood, sex drive, memory, muscle mass loss, you name it. And yes, low testosterone is more common the older you get, but it can affect men at any age. So let's talk about today's sponsor, Let's Get Checked. You can order a testing kit that will be delivered to you in a discreet packaging with next-day delivery. Once your sample arrives in the laboratory, confidential results will be available from your secure online account within 2 to 5 days. So, if you want to test your hormone levels without having to leave your home, visit trylgc.com/MSCS Media and get 25% off your test using the code MSCS Media. The link is in the description at the top. This episode is brought to you by Fiji. More than just water.
This is not just rock. It's ancient volcanic rock that filters tropical rain, giving it double the electrolytes and its signature soft, smooth taste. It's not just water. It's Fiji water.
Swing at you. So that's unfortunately what we went through.
Sounds like politics, and just at a greater level.
It's the human condition, corruption.
Now, with the other beings that you've talked to other people with, are they described similar to what that picture shows?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We found that there was one in Russia. There was an adult. This apparently was a child that was about 1.5 feet tall. There have been others reported in other parts of the world. Again, not knowing whether it's from another star system or whether it's something that's never been run to ground biologically on the Earth. It's quite rare. I am not saying it's extraterrestrial because we don't know that yet. It certainly doesn't look human. We know it's not human. What we don't know is what it is. So that's the one big question mark 11 years after we started researching it.
And last thing I'll drive you nuts about that, do you think that the extraterrestrials that do come here, do they breathe oxygen? Do they have are they breathing something else from where they're at? You adapt to whatever you're at, I would assume.
Well, there are hundreds of species.
Hundreds of species.
And they have different biological needs and criteria. I'm sure that many of them. Now, one of the odd things about that particular species is that they're apparently only seen at night or under the moon because the radiation from our sun is too intense.
Interesting.
That's been well documented from people seeing the living ones in that part of the Atacama Desert in Chile, but also in other parts of the world. They've never been seen daytime in sunlight. And it would make sense that if you evolved under very different radiation from your star at whatever distance, that this sun could be, really damaging or dangerous.
Right, too close or too far, either way. And then the one, I forget his name, in your documentary, he was speaking of one that had crashed, and there was still an extraterrestrial alive.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And was it described similar to what we just showed, or
no?
No,
Very different. Now, one of the things we're going to unveil we're going to do a 2-day disclosure conference before the National Press Club event. It's open to the public. People can come. It's in Washington on the 10th and 11th, and the press club is
tab 3 or tab 4.
Mm-hmm.
That way we have it up for you.
And so what that's going to be, we're going to also unveil. We can't show all 119 crashes, but we have 119 extraterrestrial and UFO crashes that we've documented, and many of them we've been able to illustrate and get the record information for. So those of the people who want to come, it's open to the public until it sells out, and then the next day after Sunday, the 11th, we're going to have the National Press Club event, and we're going to have a showing. Actually, the Washington, D.C. premiere for The Lost Century will be that Sunday night, the 11th.
That's some good marketing there, sir.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't have a foundation supporting us. This is all being done through.
No, it's good.
And by the way, the film is crowdfunded. So thelostcenturyfilm.com, you can go and contribute because we don't have anyone funding what we're doing.
Go to the next tab, Robin, and we'll go back to this. I want to ask Dr. Greer. Everybody can donate
beautiful,
right there.
Here we go. You can donate there at the Lost Century. But this is actually the artist rendition of the Norton Air Force Base hangar, 1988, and there were 3, a little one, a baby, mama, and daddy, ARV. These are man-made.
All these are man-made.
All these are man-made. We have the whole transcript of a man being interviewed who was there, and there were some top secret. It was a top secret air show at Norton Air Force Base. It's now a closed, decommissioned. And what's interesting about it is that those objects, the components inside, were Mercury era, meaning late 1950s, early 1960s. And they had kind of charred areas where obviously it had been in and out of the atmosphere, and it was reported. These had been all through our solar system about 8 to 10 years before we landed on the moon with the lunar module.
Really?
Yes.
That we put up there.
Yes. But
Damn.
those are deep black classified. These are Lockheed.
That's deep black
Yeah.
classified information, right?
Yep.
Holy
This is way beyond
shit.
the U-2 spy plane from Lockheed Skunk Works. This would be the deep black end of that.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Even if you donate $100, $50, any donation's good, right?
Any $3, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
The donations
Every bit helps.
have gone from $1 to $125,000.
And you're up to what? 600K, 700K?
Yeah. So,
congratulations.
Yeah. So we've done that with all the films, Unacknowledged, the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind film, which is about making contact, and we have an app called the CE5 Contact app, which trains you in remote viewing and making contact with these civilizations. That's all been crowdfunded.
And what's amazing, if you've been under a rock and didn't see any of your films, they're not shit films. I mean, they're good. The quality's good. The transition's good. Like him as a video guy, I mean, it's they're really good. Go to the next step. And now this is about the film, and that's June 6th is coming out. So you want to go into it a little bit more?
Yeah, so what I think the reason we're doing this film and crowdfunding it by the public so no corporate people can corrupt it.
Thank you.
FYI, the reason we do not take in controlling interest from a corporate or even a private investor is that I want to be sure that we can put the truth in there, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Because the old saying, he who has the gold rules. And what you find, I've been involved with projects where the people who are doing it will say one thing, and what they end up editing and comes out to the public is 180 degrees different. Before I wised up to this, I went, oh, my God. So I said, no, not going to do that anymore. So this is our fifth documentary in 10 years. And so our goal with this one is to actually prove that these technologies exist, but also explain how they've been kept secret. Because people don't realize if these were true, and this is a scientist, this is my science hat here. If these technologies were actually extant, they exist, have existed for 100 years, why isn't that taught at MIT, Caltech, Harvard, University of Virginia, wherever? Well, it's because those technologies, once they begin to emerge, get smashed like whack-a-mole. But it's ruthless, and I mean, people have been killed. I know of people personally who have been killed. I know devices that have been confiscated, companies that have been taken down through entrapment, people who have been imprisoned. Now, this level of corruption, I think the Department of Justice really at some point, it needs to investigate the level of criminality behind this secrecy. And that extends to the entire UFO subject. This new energy part of it is a sort of a subset of a whole constellation of issues that deal with extraterrestrial vehicles, man-made deep black programs that deal with man-made UFOs, which is most of what people see, I think. And then the ruthless and criminal suppression of the science and technologies and innocent people. Down here in Miami, one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, Colonel Charles Brown, he had developed a water-based system. He called it a thunderstorm in a bottle, electrostatic, that would go in the intake of an engine in the 80s. And actually, the Department of Transportation, U.S., tested it on a tugboat, and it absolutely extended the range of the fuel, cleaned up the exhaust amazingly. He had his lab broken into. It was sabotaged. He was threatened, bomb threats. And, he had like $250,000 savings he was a career military guy, lost all of it and gave up. And it's an amazing interview if you look at that interview with Colonel Brown. And so this story, these are real people who have been victims of a vicious and fascist, ruthless group of folks who do not want it out. And I don't think we can ever overcome that unless we do something like we're recommending, and that's a new energy lab that we're proposing. The whole lab would be live streamed like this. And anytime there's a breakthrough, a eureka moment, It's on the internet. It's out to scientists. It's out to other labs. It's out to universities. They can reproduce it. Because, this is the other problem. People who work in this area secretively, privately, like, oh, I'm going to be the next Rockefeller of energy. It's all the, Gollum, my precious ring sort of thing. They don't realize what they're up against when they try to bring it out. And so by keeping it secret, that's their Achilles heel. Because by keeping it secret, the world doesn't know about it. My suggestion is that we open source this process, come out with at least a solid state version of something that would run this building with no energy. And it's all disclosed publicly, open source, and let there be 1,000 companies that take it and run with it. That's what we need. Now, that's not what most venture capital people want to do. And if you have to raise $50 to $100 million to do this, which I think is a conservative number, that's a heavy lift financially, which I certainly don't have that kind of money as a retired doctor. But I do think that there are people who are concerned about energy security and or the environment and or world poverty who do. And so we need to get that message to them. The reason behind this film is to say we need to create a consortium of people, a movement to move these technologies forward, at least what I call the first phase of them, not the things that fly. I've already told the head of the head of the Air Force in charge of future technologies. I told him, I said, we won't touch that right now. Let's get up off our backs and crawl before we run and levitate, right? So we need to do this in a rational fashion given the exigencies and the state of the world out here, which is unstable, obviously. But we need to get moving on it. And if it's done open source, it doesn't mean that, let's say we put those funds into a lab. Once the whole world has been proven, people are not very smart financially or business-wise. Think of the millions of applications of something like that. It's something that would run your cell phone without ever having to be plugged in, or your computer, or run this building, or a manufacturing plant, or every product in your house, whether it's a refrigerator or your heating and cooling system, would have its own internal energy generation system, so you don't need wires. So there are so many applications. It's like DARPA coming up with the internet. It spawned millions of companies and multi-trillion-dollar companies. We need DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Administration, which is part of the Pentagon, is not going to do this. But a private group can. We can. And if we do it, and it's open source and put out there freely, it doesn't mean that same group who'll be on the ground floor couldn't then create different products so they could get their investment back. So if they put in $50 million, they'd probably get $50 trillion back eventually. But at this point, who cares about the money? Well, people who care about money care about money. I care about the future of the planet, and what's my 12 grandchildren going to have here? A cinder floating through space. So I think we have to figure out how to do it, and I think that is the best plan forward. Now, once that's done, what are they going to do? I liken this to having a tube of toothpaste and squeezing it so damn hard that it's out and you can't put it back in. And I don't think that you can do it any more subtly. If you try to go venture capital, keep it secret, my secret formula, my patent, this is what people have been doing for 100 years, man, and it doesn't work. It does not work.
I talked to a physicist off camera, I don't want to say his name, but he was against the UFO thing and not thinking about the energy thing. Most people don't. That's why I think your new film is so important, because it's not just this craft flying around. And I mean, to me, it's the coolest thing in the world and everybody else, but there's so much more to it with the energy and how they do it. And all of them have, it looks like plexiglass, and that's how they kind of pull the energy through, and, free energy, blah, blah, blah. So when we were off, he said, the reason why my mind has started to change was because for 35 years, I didn't get any info. Nothing. Nothing about UFOs, nothing about anything that physicists do. Not just UFO stuff, IPA, whatever the new name is of the week. Nothing. Just like physicists just diminished, and if you didn't have money in your pocket, you basically just went to a college and teach whatever they've been teaching for 80 years.
Right.
And then he had said, whether it's our stuff, their stuff, a balloon, like you said, to distract, whatever it may be, too many people started talking about it. So he started looking into it, And he went right to the energy. And he said, 20 years ago, if I would have gotten this information from anyone, any of my colleagues, anybody, as you said, we could be 100 years further.
Yep.
We could be so much. And this is a guy, Dr. Greer, I'm telling you, you could put a gun to his head and he would say, look, that's all fake. They're not, if they're real, why would they let us see them? Blah, 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 blah. And I had said, based on watching you before I knew you were even going to come in, they're shooting nukes up there. If they're up there, that's got to be fucking with their time travel, right? I mean, I'm not any of those guys, but just that simple math, it throws everything off.
Right.
Long story short, now a guy who completely is against it is now looking into it, and now he's pissed that the rest of the people, and he's saying, hey, look, I'm at this level. This is what I have, and I'm doing it all by myself, this pie thing, blah, 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 and no one still will help him. So why do you think now, when you turn on the TV, what is the distraction for now? Like, why are they putting all this up all of a sudden now? Not like it hasn't been there. Now the Jets are seeing them. Now this person's seeing them. Now the president, said, okay, we're going to do a, IPA. They change the name every other week.
UAP, yeah.
Is that where we're at now, UAP?
UAP.
Okay, UAP. Why now are they addressing it? What are they distracting? What of the 100 things are they distracting, using that to distract, or is it just too much?
Okay, this is going to be an important question to unpack. So let me explain. When unacknowledged hit that number, they realized that was gone viral and it created a sea change, both in government circles and in the public. Because very rarely does an indie documentary start pushing up 1 billion views. What happened is that they've then, since then, the last 5-6 years, tried to create an initiative to capture the narrative back to a controlled release of the subject that's false. Now, in 1999, I knew this was going to happen. I'd already seen this plan. And I'm working with people going all the way back, like Carol Rosin, who worked with Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler. She's on my team. She's almost 80 now, but she had seen the 70-year defense plan back in the 70s.
Defense plan?
Yeah, this long-term defense plan where they were going to go from the Cold War to nations of concern, global terrorism, threats from space, and ultimately play a false flag alien threat. So that was always the trajectory, always. Now, as we have moved forward with the truth about this, the deep black projects have put what they call cutouts, people out there to capture the narrative, like Luis Elizondo and Chris Mellon and Nick Pope, these people. And they're doing what they're told to do. And they're going to open the doors to those people to 60 Minutes and CNN and Tucker Carlson and Fox News. And the reason they are is that the media have intelligence operatives in them. There's no question about that. And so what happens is that they decided we need to capture this narrative back. And here's the narrative. Yes, they're real, but we don't know what they are. And then slowly, like with what they're saying, it just came out yesterday on MSN News with Avi Loeb and the Aero office at the Pentagon. Well, there's a mothership out there in space, and they're sending drones, but a very spooky, scary. The truth of the matter is there have been something like 3,500 pilot encounters and gun camera footage, like the Tic Tac. There have been about 4,000 landing trace cases where they've landed and left evidence. We have them. So in the intelligence archive we're putting together right now, which we hope to unveil part of it at the National Press Club. The reason I'm doing that right now, you may have heard of this project. It's costing us a fortune. We need donors. Is because, and I have to work carefully here, very senior people in the U.S. government, once they realized they were being gaslit over the last 3 or 4 years, are now operating under a congressional law that says there has to be a report on this every year to the Congress about UFOs, UAPs. And moreover, In December, 2 days before Christmas, the Congress passed and the president signed a bill allowing for whistleblowers and people with non-disclosure agreements that are classified to come forward and give their testimony.
And it's hard for me to believe that they're asking for that for a good reason.
Well, we have to have a watchdog there, so here's where I'm getting to. There are some people I'm working with in Washington that approached me after they had been deceived, gaslit. They went out to the Lockheed Skunk Works and were showed a bunch of antique jets and stuff. And the secret group that's running illegally overplayed their hand. And these guys were smart enough to know it. And these are the most senior people. These are the people who literally manage the black budget of the United States and the three-letter agencies. And I'm working directly with that team.
Good for you.
And so what we're doing is handing over this intelligence archive and all our top secret witnesses. So like in the last 2 months, we have 60 new top secret military witnesses. So I'm making a call here on your show. Anyone who's worked these projects, go to our website, info@SiriusDisclosure.com.
Can you pull that up?
SIRIUS disclosure.com. And it will be looked at. If it seems credible, it will be given to me and we'll be in touch. So what I've agreed to do, and I'm doing this pro bono, I'm not getting $22 million like that fake Bigelow Aerospace Group got. We're doing this in the public interest. We're not paid. And so...
Dr. Greer, where will we go here?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. It would just be the contact us.
Okay, contact us.
Yeah.
And then we can donate there. And this is what you're referring to, that we need donations.
That's the fund. But I'm talking about this way that witnesses can contact me. It would be under a contact bar. This is a separate document.
Sure.
But the website is SiriusDisclosure.com.
SiriusDisclosure.com.
SIRIUS, like the star. The brightest star in the sky.
Brightest
Actually,
star?
a binary star is 2 stars, but you see it as 1. Nerd alert. Anyway, my kids go, "Oh, Dad, be quiet."
Like that, please, right? Like, just tell us
up.
like simple terms.
Just shut up. They asked me why is the sky blue, and I explained the nitrogen absorbing that wavelength of light. Anyway, tedious, huh? Anyway, so
funny.
It is very funny. Yeah, we have fun. So those men and women who are in these sort of projects can come to us. We will see that they get to these, I call them the white hats, the good guys who are in the government trying to get to the bottom of this before they're taken through the official process. Why? Because we know the official process is most likely going to get corrupted and already probably is. And so I am very suspicious of it. But it's the mechanism that the law has created, which is a huge breakthrough, by the way. And we made sure that law covered not just military, CIA, government employees, but contractors. So if you worked for Raytheon or Lockheed or Northrop Grumman and had dealings with this issue, you're covered under this law that protects you to come forward. So we're making a call for that very urgently because that door is open. It may not be open for very long. I don't know. But, it was a long time getting there, and now we have a mechanism for these people to officially do it. Now, the rub there is that it's all going into a SCIF, secure compartmented information facility, top secret. But what we're looking is moving that towards an open disclosure process. Now, because I have to be careful how I say this, I hold my own clearances as a term. I determine what I say to whom. And if I want to tell somebody everything I know, I can tell them everything I know. I am under no secrecy oaths. I'm under no classifications. I refused it. So that means that the source for all that information and these whistleblowers is coming through us. But I can say it to anyone. The only thing I don't disclose is like if you're a guy who worked for the agency dealing with something very sensitive, you say, look, I'll give that information to the Senate Intelligence Committee, but I don't want to be identified publicly. I'm not going to ever expose your name. And as a medical doctor, I'm used to keeping confidences. So the only thing that we're not going to disclose at the National Press Club event are the names of the people who don't want their names out there. And that's just human decency. I would never do that. So people, when they contact me, can trust that that'll be the policy. But if they want to come forward just in a classified witness way, we can make that happen. And we'll bring you into Washington. We'll take care of everything.
And I think with that and the documentary, and then you show all the different things, I mean, what more could you do? You know, especially if you get this going here, you know, contact, you got 9 different ways to do it, you know, anything you know, and then I'm sure you vet them, you know.
Where we do, it's all volunteers, though. Okay? I don't want people to get grandiose here.
Yeah.
We don't. We have a couple of people who we have under contract to help with special things, but we don't have employees. We don't have an office building. My wife and I do this out of a corner of our house. It's a very humble, you know. It's, you know, we've had a big impact, I guess, but we've done it very kind of on peanuts.
On your own.
On our own. But we have thousands of support of volunteers. I mean, the crowdfunding, we have almost 3,000 contributors right now. And so I think that, you know, what we don't have in resources financially, we have in passion and commitment. And so you can't buy that anyway.
No,
so I mean, we've always been relatively impoverished with what we're doing. And but, you know, we put about 12 to 15 million, somewhere in that range. Dollars into this over 30 years that I've had to put in, but it's fine. You know, this is when you realize what's at stake. It's a small thing to do, and I always point out, look, you know, my father was hand-to-hand combat in World War II. You know, we'd all be goose-stepping to Adolf Hitler's great-grandson if people hadn't stepped up. I mean, there's a time for people to step up to the plate, and when I'm making a call, like I have on some shows with Navy SEALs and others, it's time for people who have been part of these projects to come forward, because there's now a mechanism for you to do so legally that's never existed in 75 years of secrecy. So that's a very big breakthrough. And if you're wanting to come public, you can be with us at the National Press Club. I hope a few people will have the courage to do that. And they can do so with impunity. Now, let me explain why. Mm-hmm. This is complicated.
What isn't complicated with all this, right?
Well, in 1998, late 97, 98, I wrote a memo to every agency in the U.S. government. And it was done under what's in the military called a unless otherwise directed letter, which means that what I did was write an assessment. Here, this subject has been managed in an illegal and unconstitutional way, and here's how we can prove it. And I attached all the ways. So I call them my inverse witnesses. You see the Disclosure Project witnesses. My inverse ones are people like Admiral Tom Wilson, who was head of Intelligence Joint Staff, who was denied access and threatened. The director of the CIA, the President of the United States, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the top intelligence unit for the entire Pentagon, all made inquiries, all were denied access to, and some overtly threatened. So by the time 1998 rolled around, I said, this is a criminal and illegal operation. Therefore, anyone who comes forward with documents, material, physical items, or their testimony cannot be prosecuted under the National Security Act or any other laws of the United States. To this day, and that was sent return receipt requested to every relevant agency. In 25 years, that has never been corrected because they can't. And if anyone tried to come after us, I was threatened once by an FBI guy. I said, come on, put on the handcuffs, because this is going to go to court, and the people who are going to be subpoenaed, I will prove that these projects are criminal enterprises. It's the largest racketeering organized criminal organization ever.
I thought my friends in South Philly were bad.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Forget about the La Costa Nostra, the mafia.
Yeah.
Those are choir boys.
Those
right?
peanuts, yeah. At least they go to church, though.
Yeah, I mean, so the point is that since that's what we're dealing with,
yeah,
then they can't prosecute these people. Now, it doesn't mean they haven't put the fear of God in these military and intelligence and corporate people. But now we have a mechanism to protect them too, physically protect them. Now, the biggest nut that's going to be to crack, I think we're going to need a period of amnesty for the top level tier of these people. I'm working with someone who's friends with a former senior General Electric executive who worked with Welch, Jack Welch. And they had contracts from the government dealing with this issue, but they were deep black and they were basically, let's call it embezzled funds. And the guy is 80s, very wealthy, several $100 million, has homes here and up in the north. And his concern is that his wealth isn't confiscated under the RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization statutes, which technically it could be. So I think at a certain point to get the higher level whistleblowers, as opposed to tactically people who are Delta forces at Nellis Air Force Base or Area 51, we're going to have to provide a pathway where we don't try to exert a pound of flesh. Because, this gets to the point where an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind. And the power that organization has is such that it way exceeds that of the U.S. government.
Well,
So the constitutional government of the United States, $5-6 trillion budget, this other entity that's transnational, global, hundreds of trillions. I can assure you technologically, financially, militarily, the secret government that's embedded is much more powerful than the government and the military people know about. So we can't be ridiculous about this. We have to think through, how do you make this happen without a scorched earth policy and a bloodbath occurring? And so that's going to be the next thing that I'm trying to achieve through a legal means through the Congress.
Well, it seems to me like you're going about it the right way. And can you pull up his conference again, Dr. Greer? Just so it's up there, be like right there by. But instead of going UFO, let's make these things that can fly. Mm-hmm. Let's do one step at a time, and let's just maybe light this studio, right? And then you get people onto that, and then let's light this, and then as people see it, then you can take it further. Because I think what I'm gathering, what you're saying is, if we take it step by step, we have a chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a step by step, but quickly.
I'll be there.
Here's the problem: we're running out of time. This is why the other call I make out, the other call I'm putting out is top secret and whistleblower witnesses on the UFO and ET issue. But also, if there are private inventors, like the one you mentioned that had an island that was running.
Yeah, Robert Beta. Yeah.
He needs to contact me, because there's a way to create that technology and disclose it that I just described. And I have some people now that if the person needed to be compensated for their years of research, we can do that. If it's not billions, but if it's substantial. So I think that the reason we need to do that, and I'm putting on a call for that, I think at any given time on the planet, there are hundreds of people who have stumbled across what Maxwell and Faraday and Tesla and T. Townsend Brown and other genius inventors, Floyd Sweet, Sparky Sweet had. We're going to feature that in this film, The Lost Century. He had a thing that's a little bigger than a cigarette pack that was a 0-point type quantum vacuum triode system. And it would run a 300 horsepower electric motor that you could put in your car. So that's all you would need. There'd be no lithium-ion batteries. There'd be a teeny little startup system, maybe a 3-volt battery. It would start running. It has enough power to run that standard electric motor generator that would run your car or your house. So those technologies have existed. That was in the 1980s. But he died mysteriously. The day he died, there were black vans that came in. His wife testified that all of his inventions and papers were confiscated. What was his fatal mistake? He didn't disperse the information. He took it to the grave. So what I'm saying to people, if there are people out there with these sort of technologies, don't walk, run to your computer and contact us. Because I'm quite confident that if we have something that's legit, that's not some kind of trick. A lot of them are tricks. I've spent about $1 million going around the world looking at mostly tricksters and frauds or people who didn't measure their physics. They didn't know their physics. But if they have something legitimate, we have a pathway forward.
I'm going to connect with Robert Beto. He did it on his own.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And and I'll never get out of my head. All I heard for 3 hours was quantum this, space never began, never ends.
Correct.
Like, what else was he? Space-time continuum.
Space-time continuum.
And literally, he went over there he was from Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
This is when I kind of first started this. He was into he was into drums.
Mhm.
So I had a drummer in, just the local drummer.
Oh, fun.
And the local drummer had said, hey, I know you're into space stuff. Do you want this guy, Robert Beto, in? And I didn't know who he was. You know,
Mhm.
he comes in and he's like, yeah, waiting on a call from Elon Musk. They were doing the particle thing. And then he was on and on. And then he was telling us about how he built the water thing, powered the whole thing, and then they blew it up. And he did it just free because he like a real person that was trying to make a difference. You gotta talk to him.
I would. Well, see, Stan Meyer had that in the 80s and 90s and died mysteriously.
Fucking nuts when they just die over inventing something to make the place a better place.
Yeah, but it's because, here's the other thing. We have a lot of celebrities who drop links for us. Like the Sean Ryan show, that was the Navy SEAL. That show got dropped by a supporter who follows our work named Chris Brown. He's a singer, rapper, I guess. And
Chris Brown? Oh, yeah, I love Chris Brown.
And then Demi Lovato,
Yeah.
and then there are other. So we have a number. Actually, this film, The Lost Century, is being narrated by a great guy, Fred Durst of Limp
Fred
Bizkit.
Durst.
Fred Durst. Oh, shit.
That's so awesome.
He's so much fun. Wonderful guy. And is doing it out of the kindness of his heart.
Oh,
Wonderful.
congratulations.
So one of the things that we can do, or we're going to do for the Lost Century, is ask these influencers to drop the link, since we're shadow banned off the internet and banned by mainstream media. But they can then reach hundreds of millions of people. There's one celebrity who's a big supporter, has 360 million Instagram followers. So that's how you can get the word out without spending $10 million in advertising, which we clearly don't have. And the other, but the same thing applies. Let's say that this gentleman has this system that will convert water to energy very efficiently, prove it. That if that can be acquired and proven and reproduced by people, just to be sure. I mean, I'm very scientific about this. You trust but verify. You always have it independently reproduced and tested, and that's the sine qua non of science. You don't just take someone's word for it. It has to be reproducible. But if it is, I'm saying if it is, then we could release that to the public, but then ask all these influencers and major A-list celebrities to drop that link. And therefore, it's out. It's out. And it doesn't matter if you get blocked by CNN and Fox News and the New York Times.
I don't think too many people are watching them anyway.
Well, no. I mean, if on a good night they might have a couple million people.
Yeah.
This can reach 1 billion.
Yeah.
So my view of it is that we have to find creative ways around this logger jam. It's sort of like I view our movement as like water flowing, and there's a big boulder here, you flow around it. Another boulder here, you flow around it. We have to find ways to flowing around these corrupt influences, which has been the biggest strategic part of my challenge. It's very hard because you have to figure out. It's not like the establishment's going to help you any here. I mean, there's the guy who wrote Enemy of the State with Will Smith.
Yeah.
David Marconi's on our team. And I said, bitch, I'm the enemy of the state. But he's a great guy too, by the way. That picture of that ET that's up in the mountains of Arizona, that right beside the guy who got his hearing healed. David Marconi, who wrote Enemy of the State, took that picture.
Really?
Yeah, he was right here,
Wow.
right beside me.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, you're a great guy.
Now, we know war is a big part of this. What's your thoughts on 9/11?
I don't know how much I want to. I mean, I know more than I should say.
I had Rick Prado. He was very open. Mike Cardello, and just to what they said, Prado was the head of CIA then. He went into Bush. 60 days prior. He said, "Look, just this CIA guy. All the cells are quiet. You might want to do something out. Not enough." Mike Cardello, he was Central Intelligence on the ground there. And he had done, they basically kicked him out after 9/11 happened because he found out too much. So when he put up examples, 2 weeks before 9/11, or maybe it was 3 weeks, all of a sudden, every elevator was changed. And now, like the stooge over here, I'm like, okay, they changed the elevators. And he's like, no, bomb. Now, he started to get upset because his wife had worked in Building 2, and she had him being just odd, him being a Central Intelligence Agency agent at that time, working with them, or what I might be mispronouncing whatever exactly he was doing, but he was investigating that for them.
Mm-hmm.
His wife was off. So he started to get upset, and he started to explain the elevator change and, you know, how he had 3,000 independent engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Independent, right?
Yeah, look
and for,
at this. Yeah.
for people that don't know, that means individual people looked at it themselves.
Right.
And they all said bomb, explosion. This podcast is brought to you by Monster Energy. Tear into a can of the meanest energy drink on the planet, Monster Energy. It's the ideal combo of the right ingredients in the right proportion to deliver a big bad buzz that only Monster can. Monster packs a powerful punch, has a smooth, easy drinking flavor. Athletes, musicians, co-eds, road warriors, metalheads, geeks, hipsters, and bikers dig it. You will too. Monster Energy is more than just the green OG. Monster has Monster Ultra, Juice Monster, Monster Hydro, Rehab Monster, Dragon Tea, Monster Max, Muscle Monster, and many more. Buy on Amazon, buy on Walmart, or go to monsterenergy.com and believe me, you'll find a place. Unleash the beast. Monster Energy.
Well, yes, but the why. Okay. So now we have to go back to the long-term national defense plan, 70 years old now or more. And that is, in order to keep that whole game running, you have to have enemies. You know, what Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex. And it's not our soldiers on the ground. They're victims of a lot of these machinations. But it's the players, the big players, the geopolitical players, the financial players. And I have the guy who was the top scientist at the Naval Research Labs, which is the largest Department of Defense lab in the world, there in Southwest D.C. He's on my team for years, Richard Foch. He's passed away now, so I can talk about this.
Sorry.
He was in the vice president's office, Dick Cheney's at the time, and saw the plans for 9/11 before it happened. But he was told, if you talk about this, we will kill you, your wife, your children, and your grandchildren. By the way, Neil Armstrong was told the same thing if he came to my Disclosure Project event and talked about what actually he saw when we landed on the moon. But I think that, now to what end? Now think about it. After 9/11, the country galvanized together around war. The Congress passed the Patriot Act and all kinds of things they didn't even read that allowed for warrantless surveillance of everyone in the whole country. And all kinds of repercussions occurred. We went into Iraq, even though Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction at all. That was all set up. Colin Powell was played like a fiddle by the intelligence unit that Mr. Cheney ran out of the West Wing. And this has been well documented in the mainstream media, and this is not some conspiracy theory. So you have to look at this. Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin, which was an incident that we staged a false flag on ourselves, attack on our own Navy ships, so that we could expand the Vietnam War. So the warmongers and profiteers and certain people benefit from these. The public, the media reports it without question, which is very suspicious. And then the public gets brainwashed onto a war footing. Mm-hmm. Now, the big one that they've been playing up for since World War II is what's coming, and it's the false alien attack. In 1997, we organized. I just found the old VHS videotape.
Remember those?
Oh, yeah. I have bunches of them, but we thought these had been lost, but we found them last week. And we had an off-site briefing for members of Congress in Washington in 1997 before we did the public disclosure project. This was at that time, the code name was Project Starlight. And that was the mechanism under which we were doing briefings for the Clinton administration and Congress and stuff, hoping that they would do this. And as a doctor, I wouldn't have to leave my career and do it, right? But, of course, they didn't. Here we are. A century later, holding our Johnson. Excuse me. But anyway.
With donations everywhere, trying to get something done.
Trying to get by to the next level, eking out.
And again, I honor you for sticking with it.
Oh, yeah, I'm stubborn.
That's good. You got drive.
No, I don't give up. It's like Winston Churchill, never give up. Someone gave that to me years ago, and I put it on my dresser. But So I think that what the big plan has been is to keep this system running until they can pull the ultimate false flag, and that's an alien invasion. And the man that was at that 97 briefing but got taken out of the Westin Hotel in Georgetown at the last minute that night to take him to a off-site secure location was a man who had been in the 70s on an interagency committee where they could hit a button, bing, and they would fill the skies with these man-made UFOs. We're going to show a bunch of different types at the National Press Club and at that conference on June 10th, 11th, 12th. And people would say, oh my God, those are UFOs, they're UAPs, they're aliens, they're ours. But they could simulate something where it would look like an attack. And that's basically what, the report from Dr. Kit Green and Gary Nolan on all the harmful effects in the brain of the alien encounters, those are 100% human caused. But they're going to lay it off on the aliens. It's like, you have to have a boogeyman out there. So that is a complete deception.
I see what you mean. You come to the guy, to a blood doctor, and you say, here's this. And then all he focuses on is that one thing.
Right. But everyone's looking at the threat in front of them. Like when I did a briefing for, one of the reasons I did a briefing for the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency was General Patrick Hughes. We knew that things were happening under his command he wasn't aware of. And he, in fact, made an inquiry into this UFO issue and was told nothing. In fact, the only thing he got, he was furious. So I was at the conference room at the Pentagon for the general, and he goes over to a bookshelf and grabs a little, like, alien doll you'd get at a toy store, like a toy thing, like that thing.
Yeah.
And he grabs it and brings it over, and he's furious. He goes, this is all I've gotten from my inquiries. And this is a 3-star general in charge of the Defense Intelligence. I said, yes, sir, all your colleagues are in the same boat, unless they're part of the conspiracy, unless they're part of this criminal enterprise. But I said, there are people on your staff who know about this, have been read into, that aren't telling you because they don't want you to know. And there was a colonel at the table who visibly stiffened, huge guy, and he was part of that. So here's a lesson in civics you didn't hear in high school and college. The need to know on this is based on whether you're read into or briefed on this is wholly dependent on whether you're willing to go along with this level of corruption and criminality, period. Now, have there been CIA directors who knew? Yes. George H.W. Bush was the director of CIA. He was involved and knew. Woolsey was not read in. Have there been DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency generals who've known? Yes. Have others not known? Correct. Has nothing to do with your position. Have there been chairmen of Senate Intelligence who've known? Yes. Senator J. Rockefeller was part of the committee. But currently, no. And Marco Rubio, who was chair and now is co-chair, is a Florida senator. He's trying to get to the bottom of this because he's not been getting the information. He knows it's out there. So I think that people have to forget their civics lesson. That's sort of that's very quaint, and that might have existed decades ago. But that system is not in place now. My coming to age of this was my POC, my point of contact to the CIA director back in the early 90s. And he had been on Ronald Reagan's National Security Council staff. And when he told me, he says, I have this FedEx, and you should read this thing. It says, you're going to be the first person to brief the administration, the CIA director on this. And I thought, this is bullshit. There's no way a doctor rambling around in an emergency department in North Carolina is going to be doing this. But they're just wanting to pick my brain. I thought he's a spy master. He just wants to know what I know. I thought it was nonsense. No, he didn't know. And what I realized at that point, when I asked him, I said, well, how can this be? He said, well, I can understand it because when I was on Ronald Reagan's National Security Council, if we didn't want the old man to know something, we just lied to him. I said, you lied to the President of the United States? He said, oh, yeah, every day. So everyone thinks that you have the keys of the kingdom if you're chairman of these big committees in the Congress or the president or you're this person or that person in the cabinet. It doesn't work that way. The way it really works is on this issue. You will only be told what if they think you can be manipulated. like Mr. Trump and Mr. Reagan were given just enough false information to get them to support, respectively, the Space Force and, in Reagan's case, SDI, Star Wars. But they were not told the truth. They were actually told a version of the truth, which is what's now coming out through the media. The media is wanting people to first think we don't know what they are, and then secondly, oops, they might be alien, but they're hostile. And now we need an extra $5 trillion from the global economy for the military-industrial complex to be even bigger. It's a complete hoax.
And that's why I had asked about 9/11, because everybody can relate to it.
Yep.
That's alive right now.
Well, this is that on steroids. So figure though, and even the some of the big mistakes medically. I don't want to get into this too far. I'll lose my license.
Sure.
But what happened with COVID? Some of the things that happened with that.
Fuck, I talked to Dr. Robert Malone and Peter McCullough. McCullough came in twice, and between those three, I almost fell off the chair. How the data that they got, and then the correct data of all places came from China. But
Right. But stop for a minute.
Sure.
Strategically, so I'm a strategist. Why? To what end? Whether it was deliberately released or not, an opportunity presented itself to beta test a system. So 9/11 was beta testing the system. How much power can we seize, and how much freedom can we take from the people, and slip it through during the fear and panic of that. Then you had a pandemic. Through the confusion, fear, and panic of that situation, what things can we put in place that are unconstitutional, unprecedented, suspension of liberties, all kinds of things, millions of businesses. And by the way, the lockdowns, even the World Health Organization admits, were counterproductive, but we killed many times more people through the lockdowns than we did through
just walking around.
from the virus itself.
Yeah.
I mean, the virus is a nasty thing. But what I'm saying is that to what end? So I think that's a beta test to see how much will the media fall into line lockstep, and subsequently, how much will the public fall in lockstep and go, oh, okay, whatever you say, big brother. So I think what's missing is critical thinking, skepticism, and also the fourth estate, the media, which has completely been co-opted by powerful corporate interests rather than reporting the truth. And this is not a political statement. I'm just saying this left, right, center, doesn't matter, all of it. And I think this is a real problem if you pretend to be in a democracy or a republic democracy like ours, when you don't have the organs of communication that are truly incorruptible, then you run the risk of what. Back in the mid-'90s, I met with a name by Bob Schwartz, and he was on the board of Time Life. And I was up in New York at, I don't know, it was some Rockefeller thing with the UN Secretary General's wife there and all that stuff, the New York 100. I don't know who it was. And he pulls me aside, and he starts talking about this. And he says, and Bob Schwartz says, oh, yeah, the fourth estate is dead. We're basically taking dictation from the right hand of the king. And this was one of the top media people in the world. And he's very good friends with Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes. Mike Wallace had wanted to dig into this issue back in the 80s, got some documents, and CBS, at the time owned by Westinghouse, a defense contractor, said, thou shalt not do this story. And he went into a deep depression. Mike Wallace became very depressed because he realized the biggest story in history he would not be allowed to report on. So now it is being reported on by the mainstream media, but cherry-picked selectively. So they'll have people on who will only give the narrative of either, we don't know what these are, but whatever they are, they're a threat to the national security. They're a threat to the national security. This is the mantra, the talking points, that all the people that are on the CNN and Fox and MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, that's what they say, and that's what they report. So it's a narrative they're spinning. And in 1999, I wrote a paper. I started to talk about this. It literally said, predicted, that once this starts happening, the establishment will try to co-opt it. And I called it the disclosure that serves secrecy. It's on our website. Most of what we have is free. I have 400 videos or something on our YouTube channel, all kinds of stuff. But I think that what people have to look at here is, what is the agenda that would allow for that. Well, eventually they want to play this final card. It's what Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, said this is the final card they're going to play. And that is unite the world not around peace and a society that's advancing and free energy, but around this fearsome threat from outer space. And that's what they've been building up to now for 75 years. And we're seeing it play out in front of our eyes. So I'm in a hurry because basically time is not on our side. And certainly the organs of power, institutional, media, financial, what have you, are not on our side. Now, we have the truth on our side. I know that. And we have a lot of people who now are coming forward on our side. But it's daunting.
It all makes sense when you put it like that, because just the emails that we've seen from some CIA guys and doctors, everything is always a test, a test, a test, a test. COVID test, this test, just it goes on and on and on.
It's a beta test of the system.
It's a beta test, and then it goes all the way to the extraterrestrial.
Of course,
because that's the end game.
That's the end game. That's the big one, and the reason it's the big one is because what better way to, we've been in an era after World War II where it's like, Cold War, one ideology economically after another, nations of concern, terrorism, this thing, that thing. And it's sort of, they kept the machine, let's call it Rage Against the Machine. They kept this machine running. But the big one that they're wanting to play at the right moment, and they had to put their systems in place, social media, all these things. Remember, much of what we have here was reverse engineered from extraterrestrial vehicles, 40s, 50s, 60s.
I was just going to ask you that because when I was growing up...
But not the energy.
Not the energy.
The things that would... only the things that would permit these powerful interests to monitor everyone and control everyone's thinking. Like, what better way to brainwash people than social media and the algorithms?
Yeah, and when I was growing up, everybody had... If your friend had a car phone this big... Everybody wanted in that car.
I had one of those.
You know what I mean? Everybody wanted in that car. Wow, Franco's got that. We're getting in his car. And then in a matter of 20 years, you go from a rotary phone to an iPhone to the AI.
Right.
And you asked, because I'm an alien, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
I believe it. I don't know how you could deny it. And when I say, how do you think that happened that quick? What do you think? They just woke up? They were holding it that long?
Well, Colonel Corso, who ran his book Day After Roswell, I knew he's passed away, but he flat out was involved in a small way in that technology transfer, it's called. And he said, absolutely, I had fiber optics, integrated circuits, a lot of these things were in night vision, were spinoffs of studying that material. And it makes sense. Now, why weren't the energy generation systems unleashed? Because of what we talked about before, massive macroeconomic power money. Macroeconomic meaning the way the whole planet is running. And we're running on basically an 1800s power grid.
Yeah, and you're one of the, I think it was Unacknowledged, because that's just my favorite one. The guy said we're like an ancient civilization, like a bunch of monkeys running around right now, he said. And then what is it, 100 million a day that's spent and nobody knows where it went?
Right.
And then you got bam, newspaper article after newspaper, 100 million a day. And it's gone to this dark black op thing that nobody seems to know about.
They don't. And what I've learned over the last 30 years in briefing people like I'm working with now, the folks I'm dealing with now literally manage the black budget and the three-letter agencies. They have no idea that what they're funding at the Skunk Works. They have no idea. In fact, I've had to give them a map of where the DUMBs are, the deep underground military bases, and the underground connectors. And they said, we've never been told those exist. I said, oh, they do. I'll tell you where the entrance point is. Now, this stuff we're going to release also at the National Press Club event.
So let me ask you, we talked to David Icke. Do you know David Icke?
I don't know him.
Or I don't know him either. I talked to him. And, he's very with the reptilian thing, and, they misunderstood him with Princess, and that whole thing. And the hollow cave and to go down into water. Is there any relation that you found that could be part of the deep, deep, dark state?
Of course it is. Now, here, let me give you 3 data points.
Please.
I deal with facts, not speculation. We have now from Jacques Vallée, an astrophysicist, an admission in an entry of a book he wrote that he is in possession of a 1985 CIA document describing the agency staging alien abductions in Brazil and Argentina. I know exists. I know 2 other people who possess that document. We're trying to get it. If they don't provide it to us, we'll see that it's subpoenaed. Here's a warning. You're going to do this the nice way, or you're going to do it the very difficult way on the other end of a subpoena. Number 2, we have an Air Force Office of Special Investigations guy who for years worked this issue at Kirkland Air Force Base, who admitted on camera that deep black projects were conducting abductions of innocent civilians staged to look alien that aren't. Absolutely.
Sick.
Okay, and then we have a document that this, and the wording in the 1985 CIA document says, for its psychological warfare value. Now, what does that mean, psyops? To brainwash people that there's some boogeyman out there that's scary. But the project started in 1953. I have a CIA document from William Bedell Smith, the CIA director at that time, and it's about the UFO issue being used, and I quote, for its psychological warfare value. Now, that document's in my book, Unacknowledged, and also the disclosure book. That's 500 pages of top secret witness testimony. I know it's not fashionable to read. I think some school board made it illegal.
I'm sure.
I'm just...
I took out wood shop and everybody else they take out wood shop, and I don't even know if you want to call it history. So
I like joking about it. It's very
probably is.
It's very politically incorrect to read or do math, but nevertheless, my point is those documents exist. The testimony of people who were involved in those abductions. Now, in the early days, what we did in the late 50s, early 60s, we'd take a guy that had some deformities or was very short and make them look like an alien and put them on board one of these man-made, those things right there. And they'd come in and, of course, throw a chemical canister, knock the person out. They'd abduct them. They'd remember this terrible alien abduction. It's all nonsense. It's called? It's called stagecraft. The mutilations are the same thing. Those were 100% being done by us. They're not being done by aliens.
And then they go on the ID channel, whatever channel, and they say,
yeah.
I was abducted, and, they had me, and I came out. Wow.
Now,
never think about that.
Well, no one thinks about this.
What's that, Rob?
Do you think it's been a while. I've been over about. I'm just amazed by all this, by the way. It's not that it's amazing. Do you think the powers that be, whoever they are,
mm-hmm.
are strategically, or they have the power to, I'm just going to use this as an example, go to a planet far, far away that they can live on, or they've been there back and forth, and secretly the Earth they know is going to be destroyed in I don't know how long. They know it's happening, and they have built up this power in this thing, and they're just going to one day get on, go, wave bye-bye as they're going, and there goes planet Earth as we know it, and they're now saved, per se.
Well, that's been speculated for years. I do know the capability exists, at least go into our solar system. I question that they've mastered the physics to go interstellar. Okay. Now, there are assets that we have on the moon that are man-made, and most likely on Mars. I know that there are ancient structures on both the moon and Mars, but there are newer structures that have been imaged by people who've been in classified locations. Carl Wolf, who's one of our Disclosure Project witnesses, was in 1968 at Langley Air Force Base in a classified area of the National Security Agency sector where they were downloading the early 1968 digital mapping of the moon before the lunar module landed. And he saw some of those images clearly had both ancient structures on the moon, but there were some fairly new-looking structures. Now remember, that object, that alien reproduction vehicle, ARV, that was from the late 50s, early 60s, and had been around the solar system well before the lunar landing using rockets and jet thrusters. So you have, it's like a parallel universe here of technology and classified programs. But and I have met with a Navy SEAL who also has been on one of these man-made anti-gravity systems and been to the moon for 2 weeks. He was deployed there for 2 weeks.
And could you elaborate? This interested me like crazy. In your documentary, I believe he was on the moon, or he had gotten the document or the report from the moon, and he was up there and he saw radar tower. The first time we were up there, I believe, is that correct? And he saw radar towers, some type of towers, and he went to go close to it, and he was just scared to death and walked away.
Mm-hmm. That's Carl Wolf.
Carl Wolf.
Those were the digital images that he saw. He wasn't at the moon. He saw they were the early digital mapping that they were doing of the lunar surface prior to the landing, right? And he was in this section, and it scared him because he was there to fix something. It was an incidental. He wasn't really read into that project, but someone working there said, "Come over, I want to show you this." See, a lot of these witnesses and events that happen are rather sort of incidental. Now, there are other people. Now, we have someone coming forward now who for 10 years worked in a division in the sub-basement of the Pentagon on all these projects. He was into, I think he was briefed across 18 USAPs, Unacknowledged Special Access Project, baseline clearance. And he's coming forward. We're bringing him to Washington to testify in the classified process.
Beautiful.
I'm hoping all these people eventually their information comes out publicly, even if their names are redacted. My own feeling is that I don't, given the death threats and the stalkers and the weirdos I have now in my life, I'm very glad to keep someone's name out of it, but it's just more credible to the public if the person comes forward. That's what we did with the Disclosure Project. Remember, what you've seen with the Disclosure Project, those 70 or so men and women, I actually have about 750. So only about 10% of them were willing to be named and come public. And the ones who have the most sensitive information are the ones who don't want to come public, which look, I'm a civilian private entity. I can't force anything, nor would I. I mean, I think it should be people who are willing to do it, and they have to do their own SecOps, security operation threat assessment of what they can stomach to do. But now here's another data point on the abductions. I have a new top secret witness who is based out of the Nellis Range, the Area 51's to the kind of south, way up in the Nevada test range. There was a helicopter base, and he was deployed from there on a retrieval team, and to retrieve both the man-made UFOs that malfunctioned. He retrieved a couple of those, and the extraterrestrial ones. When he realized what we were doing, he was so disgusted he wanted to leave that project. And luckily, he had an uncle who was powerful enough in the system who got him out. But they kept threatening him. This covert group of thugs, they are thugs, kept threatening him. At one point, he went back to where he grew up. He was driving a pickup truck, and this fake triangular Northrop Grumman UFO appeared. And then outside his vehicle, the motor stopped. And outside his vehicle was one of these gray, like this guy that you have here. And that thing.
Yeah.
And of course,
he's got four fingers.
Oh my God, it's actually what's called a PLF, program life form. And he was sort of stunned with some kind of a directional energy weapon, but he finally got enough willpower. He was a strong guy, shoved the door open and knocked that creature down, and kicked. He then got out and kicked it, and he tore the skin, which wasn't skin at all. It was a synthetic material, and inside were all these integrated circuits and wires. And we have a drawing of this. We're going to show this, and it's a phenomenal. But we have many, many cases like that. So the public, what they'll hear through the UFO smashed potato circuit and media and Hollywood and so-called ufology, which doesn't exist, it's nonsense, is, these, I said, yeah, I know the guys who are building these. You want to know where they're doing it? I know the physicists who are just them. So this is, to me, it's like, yeah, come on, how gullible can you be? Civilizations that are capable of interstellar travel, if you're at that point of science, you can pretty much materialize anything you need. There's nothing on this planet they need except peace and cooperation, because if we escape this planet as a violent species, we're a threat to innocent planets. And if we muck up this planet too far, which I think they find a very beautiful planet, and most humans are beautiful people, then we face an extinction level event, which has happened before. So I think they're here for completely altruistic reasons, but they're the ultimate boogeyman. And people say, when is this false flag going to happen? I said, well, it started in 1953. So the plan to sort of brainwash the public of the alien threat, good aliens, speaking of Ike, the reptilians and the grays and the this, it's cowboys and Indians in space, right? It's a myth. It's nonsense. Now, if you're not read into the technologies that allow a man-made fabricated alien, you can be forgiven for being deceived. But here, what we're going to show at this conference at the National Press Club here are the cases. New York Times using these two corroborating, if something controversial theory, we have 4 fact-checkable cases establishing that these are being done for their psychological warfare value. Now, it makes for a great movie and a great documentary. I could talk about being abducted and raped by aliens, but I mean, it's just a load of BS. Now, have people had contact with these civilizations? Yes, but it's not the same as what's being presented and pushed to the forefront. And what you're seeing at the Pentagon last year, after we got a lot of these key people in the government read into this, Kit Green, Dr. Green, and those people released a whole bunch of stuff, 1,500 pages, showing how the UAPs had caused miscarriages and pregnancies and brain damage, like you were talking about. And of course, every one of those cases they failed to mention were their own abduction squads.
Right.
Masquerading with a mask as an alien.
Building up to
Building
the
up
ultimate.
to what?
It's all building up to the ultimate
goal,
I would say. Right?
The ultimate goal is to unite the world around a military totalitarian system, which, look, Kissinger famously said, secrecy is the ultimate, secret power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. That kind of power and secret power, kind of maneuvering behind the curtain. But what we want to do is, it's like the Wizard of Oz with this old crudmudgeon scaring the heck out of Dorothy and the Scarecrow. We need to pull the curtain back and say, here's this a group of old crudmudgeons who are scaring the hell out of you with all this, what they call stagecraft, staging stuff. But now the real information is beautiful. And so there's this real contrast between actual contact with these civilizations and why they're here, and their technologies, and what the world might look like 20, 50, 100, 1,000 years from now if we get this right, versus this other narrative, which has unfortunately been fast-tracked. The reason I'm moving very quickly to bring out the lost century to show these technologies, but then stepping up what I call disclosure 2.0, is that since the last 13 months, where we started providing this massive, we have a 5 terabyte intelligence archive I've assembled that I'm handing over to the government. And that's given them a roadmap to get into those bases and into those facilities. And they've had 1 fatality on that team. But the other part, this sort of secret government group, they know all that, and they're trying to leap ahead with all the counterintelligence and false information. So it's, and of course, they have trillions and we have nothing. But
yeah.
So this is what keeps me awake at night, is that it's a little bit like, can we all collectively, not me, but can we all collectively be Luke Skywalker and hit that one place on the Death Star before they blow the planet up, speaking to your point. Because honestly, some of these people are kind of wacky. When I met with the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein.
How was it? How was that?
Oh, boy.
That must have been interesting.
Yeah, well, in that interview, I let him do most of the talking. And here's why. Because he proceeded to tell me how he and some other people in this covert group had been funding all the abduction cults, all the abduction research groups, like John Mack and Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and others. He says the reason we are is that we want the public to hate the aliens enough to accept the cost in blood and treasure to have an interplanetary war so that the world can come to an end and Christ will return.
That sounds like a good idea.
I mean, it was like, no, I'm just listening going,
Yeah.
now this is the most, excuse my language, batshit crazy thing I've ever heard. I'm sitting there listening. This is 1994, July 94. And he wanted me to join that
Can't wait to hear
whacked out effort. And I'm going, now this was like a 4-hour meeting or something. I don't know. It was at the Pier, Four Seasons there across from Central Park.
At least you got the Four Seasons.
Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't stay there. He did. I was
We'll be at the shack.
Yeah, I was, as usual. But so what happened is that he really believed, and of course he was a major funder of this group called Opus Dei at the Vatican. The Pope would come and do a mass at the castle in Liechtenstein, and he had this belief that we had to destroy the planet.
Oh.
So I've explained to people, this is called eschatology, the study of how the world's going to end. So there's a certain segment of this covert, shadowy, weird, twisted world that I got introduced to that they really think that'd be a great thing, And that was when I realized that, boy, we're dealing with some people, they ain't wound too tight, to quote John Callahan, our witness, who said that, talking about the people at the CIA trying to seize the FAA tapes of the Japan Airlines case. It's our disclosure. By the way, I have the originals.
You have the originals?
Of that radar tape. He took it. CIA thought they took it. When he retired, he took it. Now Disclosure Project has it.
We have a verified document that, people don't just leave things on the computer for no reason,
right.
If you know what I mean.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And what did Bill Gates say? 100, how many million dead by... You wanted like 100 million dead by some, I forget, I'd have to read it again. Or was it 100,000? A lot of people dead by 2030 and then 2040. And Bill Gates is on it. And then you could verify it was him. And then when you go through everything you're saying, it just all adds up. It all adds up. Whether, Bill Gates is just on there. Of course, it's not just Bill Gates. It's a lot of them, all together. But it's just... It's mind-blowing when you put it all together. Now with what you're saying, it just makes all sense. One thing after another to lead to the alien thing. Now you got the balloons floating around. Sure. And there was a balloon floating around that high for 11 years, and nobody saw it. If that's the case, we got some real problems.
No, here's what happens. This is sort of another dog and pony show. There have always been, like the Tic Tac, those have always been tracked. They've always been chased by pilots. I have reports going back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way through. We have thousands of these. They pulled the trigger and said, let's start reporting this. Let's leak this out. Tell the media to cover it, so they will. And then they start covering it, but it's with this specific narrative of there being a threat to the national security. So we knew this. I mean, when I wrote that paper in 1999, when disclosure serves secrecy, you can look it up on our website, and it's in my first book. And I have 5 books, and that's in the very first book because I knew that this is what they were going to do. And unfortunately, now it's all come into play. So as we move forward with the actual truthful disclosure, they're going to redouble again their efforts at this false disclosure and counterintelligence operation. And since they control the mainstream media and what have you, it's obviously a very big problem for us strategically. But I think at a certain point, enough people through shows like this and various celebrities dropping links to the Lost Century and other, people are going to go, Here is my view. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If enough people know, when they see the Lost Century, they're going to see, absolutely, we have these craft. The Tic Tac is a Lockheed device. What you're going to see on the 10th, 11th, and 12th in D.C.
Pull that conference up again.
No. What you're going to see, you're going to see
it's going to be so cool, man.
A mass sighting of that same object. It looks like a cylinder and it's white from the 1960s. You're going to see the drawing of a new top secret witness who in the 1990s saw that being offloaded off of a C-130 transport vehicle.
Jesus.
The exact same thing as the Tic Tac that they're saying, we don't know what these are. And then you're going to see the Tic Tac. So this is from the 60s to when that event happened in the 2000s, and it's the same object, and it's made by our aerospace industry. And yet you have the chairs of the Senate Intelligence Committee and Armed Services and all kinds of people in the media going, oh, my God, we have no idea what this is. Well, after June 12th, there'll be no excuse for that level of ignorance because we're going to show it.
What about the plane that crashed that was headed to Malaysia? Is there any connection with that? That seemed really weird. If not, then we'll just pass on that.
I honestly have no information on that. We do have a new top secret witness.
That just seemed kind of odd to me.
That has come forward regarding an Indonesian event in 2009, after the tsunami and earthquake. They killed 250,000 people. That they were in a group, a military group that went in and came across a special operations group with a 150-foot diameter.
Damn.
Man-made, half the size of a football field round. Yeah. Man-made disc that was on the underside of it was a circular elevator coming down, and they were offloading massive quantities of drugs and weapons. So part of this deep black operation is funded through the drug trade and weapons trade.
Not surprised.
I've known this for a very long time. Now, what I'm telling you now, that is very dangerous. But when I'm asked in Washington by people who are now investigating this, they go, where are they getting all the money? And why is all this being done in cash? I said, well, there are two ways. There's the black budget of the United States. Let's say we fund a B-2 stealth bomber. We get billed $2 billion a piece for those. It actually costs $120 million to make it or something. The other 1.8 goes through the back door into these projects, making man-made UFOs.
How about that pile of cash that Obama put on a plane in the middle of the night and just disappeared and nobody ever talked about again?
Well, that happens all the time in special operations, and some of those are legal black projects. In other words, let me make a distinction. There's top secret, special compartmented information projects that are black and unacknowledged that the Congress, the key people in Congress that are read into these and the president know about, and the National Security Advisor. But then what I'm talking about are projects they do not know about. So I want to make a clear distinction between,
thank you.
This is the mistake Snowden made.
Yeah.
Snowden made the mistake of coming across information, however, spooky,
important it was.
Yeah. Was being overseen was known by the president, was known by the national security apparatus, and the key people in Congress who were tasked with being read into or briefed at that TSSCI level. And I said to one of his people once, I said his mistake was disclosing that rather than waiting until he came across ones that were being run illegally. Now, this entire UFO energy system, all that, because I have had these inverse witnesses, these very senior people, not just here. I mean, I briefed the head of the Minister of Defense of Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, all in the same boat. And in the United Kingdom, you're also head of MI5 and MI6, your military intelligence operations, domestic and foreign. And when I met with Lord Hill Norton, a 5-star admiral, he said the whole time he was head of the MOD, head of all those intelligence programs, and head of the military committee of NATO, he never knew anything about this. And he was furious when he retired and found out from an old book, it's a great book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good, that all this was going on. When I met with him, the reason I met with him, he wanted me to bring the presidential briefing document that we do for each president. And I forget who was president then. It doesn't matter. But anyway,
which one did you try to give it to, right?
Oh, it's gone to all of them.
Yeah, I know.
And been put in their hands.
Yeah, and they just go, oh.
Well, they go, what am I going to do about it? They won't tell me anything. It's like Bill Clinton told a friend of his who used to live at the White House, who I know. He'd sit there and go through. He'd sit in the private quarters and go through this best available evidence and go, I know all this is true, but they won't tell me a thing, not a goddamn thing. Something to that effect. She impersonated him really well, but it was funny. But no, Lord Hill Norton, he's going, why wouldn't they have told me? I said, well, sir, with all due respect, can I answer your question with a question?
Why would they tell
me? And he thought I was being cheeky, a yank.
Yeah.
I said, no, just bear with me. What would you have done if you were head of the Ministry of Defense and you found that there was an organization, transnational, global, running these projects illegally, that they had engaged in murder, criminal activities, embezzlement, drug running, and have kept from you and your government and the people the technologies that would end global poverty and fix the environmental conundrum forever. He leapt from his chair and said, I wouldn't have stood for a bloody damn minute. I said, that's why they didn't tell you. So here's everyone, get this memo. They do what I as a doctor, I call a soul biopsy. They do a deep psychological profile. Would you be willing to go along with this horrible agenda? If the answer is no, they don't care if you're the president or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or whoever. You're not going to be told. If you are, then they're going to give you a little bit of information. See what you do with it, and a little more, and a little more, and a little more, and a little more. And then you're brought in. Even the guys who are at these retrieval operations on ET craft, they're first going in thinking they're retrieving crashed regular helicopters and jets for their classified components and stuff. And that's why it's top secret. Then they get moved, some of them, into these more specialized units that retrieve the actual man-made UFOs that just become malfunction and crash, or the extraterrestrial ones. So it's very, very specific program. But if they find out that you are not willing to stay in that agenda and on that agenda, they're not going to tell you anything. So many of these people, whether you're a congressman or a senator or president or military guy, if they think that you're not going to go along with it, they're going to tell. The exception would be certain political leaders that they think they can provide a sort of spun version of it. All right. So I met a Colonel Holman, who was during the late Carter and Reagan years, who was on a committee trying to convince them to fund SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. And one of the pitches, he told me this, was that there was an alien threat that we had to fight. Carter thought that was nonsense and didn't buy it. Reagan bought it. And unfortunately, I think Trump did as well. That's how we ended up with that situation. I think from what I know now from people who are friends with him, he knows he was played on some of these things. But the presidents, if they are vulnerable to that kind of disinformation, will be provided cherry-picked events and hoaxed events, like the abductions and mutilations and stuff, to say there's a threat from outer space and the aliens are a threat. And that's how they can manipulate a president into going along with a clandestine operation. Other presidents that they think would not be tricked, they don't even try.
They don't tell them anything.
So I know how this works. I know how the whole system works, because I've personally briefed and debriefed the men who've been on the task with doing it to presidents. So some presidents have been victims of that. And that's why you'll see, in Unacknowledged, you'll see the president stands up, Reagan, at the UN and says, wouldn't our job of uniting the world be easier if we had a common alien threat? So, see, that's the punchline right there.
Yep.
That's what everything in the last couple years and the last few months is moving to, where they then say, oh, look, there are these balloons, and we're shooting these things out down over the Midwest or Canada. You know, those are all regular items. Those are not extraterrestrial. But the media covers it when they're told to, and the military starts reporting it when they have a strategic need. The strategic need now is to make people sense that we're under attack, that we're being invaded. But it's done gradually. I mean, they're not stupid. There's an acculturation. There's a desensitization.
Like you said, right now they're testing to see how people react. And you got guys like Nolan and whoever else that it does this, it does that.
And how gullible are they? I mean, they want to see how gullible are the media and how gullible is the populace. Now, the bad news, I think, it's like The Who. We won't be fooled again during the Vietnam War. You know, the song of The Who. We should play that bumper music. I hitchhiked to the Who concert when I was 18.
Did you?
Yeah.
How good was that when you were 18?
It was fun. We didn't have tickets. We sort of scammed our way in. But anyway.
Those were the days, right?
Yeah, well, 18 years old and full of piss and vinegar. But So we go to this thing, but that song, you think about it, we have been fooled again.
Yeah.
We were tricked in Vietnam. We've been tricked in the Gulf Wars. We were tricked absolutely in going into Iraq after 9/11. Much of the management of COVID was a completely ridiculous.
I think we were tricked to death, so I could say that part.
Yeah, and so then now we see this huge juggernaut of reporting on UAPs. I love the term. I agree with you when you said the name. By the time they knew what they had, they invented this weird term UFO, unidentified flying object, something banal.
Right, and then it was IPA, right?
Now UAP, unexplained aerial phenomenon. First of all, it's not unexplained. It's not just aerial. They are in space and go through water.
Yeah,
and it's not a phenomenon. Ball lightning is phenomenon.
Right.
These are actually objects, craft. So. They always make up a new name that is itself a sort of a mind trick, a sort of a.
But if you're paying attention to you and you go through your real research and like the amount of people that you've had come out and talk. Again, we're not talking about Rob or me. I mean, not that we're dingbats, maybe sometimes, but. We're talking about the top of the top. What are you going to sit here and tell me? That 500 top-notch guys are going to, let's just say it the way it is, risk their life, go on camera, and you have documents. Even the JFK and Marilyn Monroe document you have. And we had James Files in. And James Files in, guys, he was nice enough. We had to do him on Zoom. He was nice enough to speak to us. And, hey, I mean, to me, that whole Oswald thing, James Files, I mean, I don't know how you couldn't believe him. And then he started talking about JFK and a little bit about the UFO, but I was more on the whole magic bullet bullshit.
Right.
So.
Well, look, I mean, they have to, this is the other reason, one of Clinton's good friends came to my house after I briefed the CIA director and gave a whole list of executive order recommendations to declassify this and bring this out. And one of his friends, a big fundraiser for the Democrats, came down to my house in North Carolina. At the time, I was down there working full-time as an emergency doctor, and he says, well, they were very supportive of what you're recommending, but the people who are advising the president feel that if he does this, he'll end up like JFK. And I start laughing. I thought, this is nonsense. Unfortunately, he said it in front of my 4 young children who were old enough to understand what he was saying. And, of course, one of my daughters goes, Daddy, is this dangerous? I said, no, don't worry about it. So I thought he was joking. I started laughing. Ha, ha, ha. He says, no, they're serious. I said, well, talk about that in front of the children. So I take him. I said, let's go to the library of the house. We had a big library in it. And talk about this, without the children around. And he says, oh, absolutely. They're very concerned that if he presses on this any further, that there are interests that. And I said, you mean the Secret Service? Can't. This is 94, early 94. Because the briefing with the CIA director was December 13th, 1993. And I just thought this was a whacked out conspiracy theory. I mean, I thought this was the craziest thing I'd ever heard. And as time has gone on, I went, yeah, well, there it is. And then later, I get this guy at the National Security Agency gets me this document. That's a wiretap of Marilyn Monroe
about to go on Amnesty,
threatening,
right?
Yeah, threatening to have a huge press conference to tell the world what JFK had told her about the things retrieved from New Mexico in the 40s from outer space. Well, people have to understand there were no satellites in space
and
until
it
57.
said, and that was in 62. Unacknowledged, right?
Yeah.
And you have the paper, and it's there, and it says outer space.
Oh yeah.
Now you had to shit your pants a little bit when you saw that.
Oh no! By then I was like,
by then you already.
I was like, okay, whatever, So that's why it was a very emotional and difficult period between 91 and 94, when the whole world turned upside down. That's why I kind of got
sure
upset. Because I go, wait, this can't be the case. And then Lawrence Rockefeller says, well, we can't do too much of this because my brother, David Rockefeller of Chase Manhattan Bank, it's now J.P. Morgan Chase, he said, and his nephew, Jay Rockefeller, a senator from West Virginia, who was chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He says they're already jumping up and down on my, I won't say what, genital parts, because I'm doing this. I'm hosting you here to pull this together. This was in September '93. I just found in my archive a photograph of all of us out on the deck with Lawrence Rockefeller and all these people. But what I realized at that time was that he couldn't do too much either, because he was a multi-billionaire. He was 85. And I said, Lawrence, you're old, you're rich, and you're a Rockefeller. I'm a nobody. I'm a doctor rattling around. He says, no. He says, I can't. I said, blood's thicker than water. And he had members of his family who were tied in to these covert interests, particularly banking and oil, right? I mean,
yeah.
All right. And David Rockefeller, and he said they were really giving me a lot of pushback. So he could only do so much. And he says, I'll do things behind the scenes. I'll host the Clintons out here, get them this information, but we can only go so far in terms of any profile. So here's one of the things I've run into. There are a lot of people who know about this in very high places, but it's like the thing, everyone wants to be first to be second. They don't want to stick their necks out first.
Right.
So then I had to make a conscious decision. I was going to stick my neck out and do it, no matter what the cost and the ridicule and whatnot. But
I was thrown off in the Maryland. Like I knew that they took her out because she was going to talk. But then when you got,
why?
If you don't know about this kind of stuff, you say, why are all the Kennedys falling out of planes left and right? I mean, how many are left? One or two, And then you see that and you see, okay, well, JFK, he obviously knew a little bit more than he should have. Bobby must have knew a little bit more than he should have. Who then they both told her much more than they should have. She had a scheduled conference, right, on the news to tell all.
Yep.
On the wiretap, and suddenly they're all gone.
Yep. And that's a real document. It's top secret, and it has not been declassified. But because I've declared those projects criminal operations, if somebody wants to get me a top secret document today, I'll put it out there, because they can't prosecute you if you're disclosing something that's being run under an illegal operation. So that's why a lot of people ask, why did you take from 91 to 01? I said, I had to do my due diligence. I had to be sure that before I started putting things out there that could get people killed or imprisoned, I had to be sure that the way this was being run, I could prove in a court of law is a criminal, unconstitutional, extra-legal operation. And I had to have enough meetings with senators, key people in the Pentagon, CIA, executive branch, and other countries to establish that this operation is, in fact, an unconstitutional legal operation, not just here, but in other countries. It's not just the United States.
And is this project, what is it, Blue Beam, where they're shooting out, is that real? And is that the end part of the end game that you're referring to, or this a test, or what's your thoughts on that?
That particular operation and code name, I don't have any direct witnesses for. I do have ones who've been tactically read into operationally to the assets to stage, fake alien events, and both with craft and also technologies that look like holograms but more sophisticated and what have you. And that's been ready to roll. This one man, like I said, was on that interagency committee in 1974, I believe. So we're talking almost 50 years. So that's been fully operational for almost all of my adult life, and all of yours, I suspect. So it's a matter of when they want to play that card. Now, they can't play the card if we disclose the truth. Here's the power of knowledge. If enough people know what they're going to see in the lost century, this is why I want 1 billion, 2 billion people to see it.
The lost century, Rob?
Yeah. So if they know that we have these assets, then when if they pull this buffoonish act, should be enough people, both in the government and the Pentagon, but also the public, to go, I ain't buying it, right? Yeah. But the question is, will we be fooled again, like the Who song? My concern is they have a very good track record of controlling the narrative and the media and public panic. And I think we need to have people who don't panic, who go, whoa, wait a minute. what really happened just here, before we all stampede like lemmings over a cliff. Because this is not going to be something, not to say 9/11 was minor, but that was a relatively minor event. Vietnam was terrible, but relatively minor. COVID was terrible, but relatively minor. Pulling a stunt like this one, using these assets,
That's just
now we're talking about something that would completely upend everything in a way that we don't want it to go, in a direction it cannot go. So that's what's at stake, my friends. I mean,
and where are the real ones? And if you can't say where are the real ones, like this deep, dark state thing, like is it people we see on TV that are involved in this? Some really.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, people like Henry Kissinger and Dick Cheney.
They're involved. I figured Dick Cheney.
Admiral Bobby Rand.
And they're in this dark thing built, involved in building these things. They have the extraterrestrial craft and all that other stuff.
Well, they would. I mean, they're the policy board. There are 200 or 300 people at that top level, overseas and U.S., such as U.S. And then, through contracting operations like Lockheed Skunk Works. A lot of what Skunk Works does are conventional, but they do have a deep black division that build man-made electrogravitic, it's called, or EMGs, the electromagnetogravitics, that are the so-called anti-gravity. It's really electromagnetic field propulsion. So basically those craft are in an electromagnetic field bubble, space-time bubble, which is why they can be moving at 200,000 miles an hour and there's no sonic boom. And there's also no heat resistance on the superstructure, the shell of the craft. So we understand the science behind this quite well now. And I have a number of people who worked on those and some folks who piloted them.
What's with the water? The ones that go into the water? Is that us or is that them?
It can be either.
It can be either.
It can be either. So remember, once you master that technology, one of the things that's interesting is they have taken, let's say you have an extraterrestrial vehicle of a certain shape, they can make a knockoff. It's like a fake, Prada handbag or Rolex watch. They can make one that looks the same shape. And so there are many different extraterrestrial vehicle shapes that they've then made that look exactly like an extraterrestrial one, but it's man-made. Well, that would make sense if you're doing things that are deceptive or you're running drugs or other contraband and you're wanting to think that thing that's moving around is an alien ship. What better cover could there be for that kind of clandestine operation?
And then you can't get it because the thing's going a gazillion miles an hour. I mean, that's a cartel's dream, right?
Yeah, the F-22, no rocket plane. No one's going to, it's certainly not SpaceX. None of them are going to catch up with that. So that's where you get into this whole problem also, is that if those folks have those assets, and this was like the very last meeting, hour or so, or no, last few minutes of my briefing Admiral Wilson, who is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I have astronaut Edgar Mitchell there with me, who I was mentoring at the time. He wasn't read into any of this. And a number of witnesses, military witnesses. And the Admiral Wilson, at the end, I said, look, we really need your help. He says, well, I've already been waved off and threatened and what have you, but how do I take on this? And we, okay, he says the best thing I can deploy is a B-2 stealth bomber, right, that he knows about. He says, and I have found out that there's a secret project that is beyond the unacknowledged secret black projects I've dealt with that can do literally circles around my B-2 stealth. I said, yes, sir. He says, well, then it's point set match. I said, no. You're on the side of the law and the power of the law and the Constitution of we the people, and they're not. He says, yes, but I can't do anything about this unless the president authorizes me to. I said, well, that'll never happen.
Unbelievable.
So here's the catch-22 I got into, just so people get a sense of the flow of this, is that I would take this up the flagpole, from where presidential level, CIA director, Pentagon, top generals, and none of them, the ones who would have done it, had to do it unless they went rogue and illegal with the authorization of the president and the SecDef, Secretary of Defense.
Mm-hmm.
But the president had already been waved off and was threatened. The Secretary of Defense was left out of the loop. And so these guys are going, well, I can't pursue this unless I'm cleared to. And if I do it without clearance and without the chain of command authorizing something this important, then I'm breaking the law. And then I've crossed over, you see. It's a catch-22. Now, this is why I'm hoping that the law that was passed by Congress mandating the research into this, if we can intervene and inject into the system the truth and all these cases and all these top secret witnesses, then they won't be able to get away with it for much longer. The question is, as a private civilian entity, I have no official standing at all. Yeah. I can advise, I can provide information. I go to these meetings. I'm embedded with a lot of these research teams from the government, but I have no official status at all, nor do I want one at this point. Look, I'll be 68 in June. Last thing I need to be is be part of some damn bureaucracy.
68, look 40.
Yeah.
Man, 60. I would never get
Hey, I work out 8 hours a week.
I told him, I said, he's pretty jacked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still leg press 900 pounds and stuff. My daughters think I'm nuts. I said, that's how my stress management works, is meditation and diet and working out.
Pull up tab 6. Not that one. That's the movie.
Here's what we got to fund.
This is what we got to fund.
Right here.
Fund that.
Hey, we're in Palm Beach. There's bound to be somebody who's got a 50 or 100 million laying around.
Oh, just drive down the street there. These guys, they don't even live there. And
I know.
You know, it's absolutely unbelievable what these guys pay for these places. They
I
probably pay more in their lawn care than anything else.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for at this point. Somebody who understands what the vision is here. That they have to be kind of angel investors at first. It doesn't mean eventually it wouldn't be a very good business. Of course, I mean, I think that whoever can move this out initially to get it established as a bona fide science. These sort of zero-point quantum vacuum technologies, including the water ones, the water-to-fuel systems, because basically the way that's working is that a very high-voltage system going through water causes an activation of the 0 point. That's what people don't understand. And you cause these little, almost like tiny microscopic ball lightnings in the water, and you're getting this motive force that's beyond just hydrogen and oxygen that's in water. I don't know if your man who worked on that understands the physics of it, but that's actually what's happening. And we're going to show that in this film, The Lost Century. But I think that if we had a reasonable amount of funding and a lab set up, that in a year or two, there should be two things. One, something that'd be a transitional technology, because we're not going to replace 1 billion motor vehicles instantly. Right. And then one that's de novo, as we say, completely a big breakthrough that's new. That would be like the Floyd Suite device, Sparky Suite, this solid state device that would run your house or run your motor in your car. And I think that once the let's call it a proof of principle systems, open source released, then there will be thousands of companies. But look at what we're trying to do here. It can't be one monopoly like
it is
Standard
now.
Oil, like now. Yeah. It's got to be. You need to have thousands of innovators and companies building enough of this and raising enough capital to replace every car engine in the world, every manufacturing plant, all public utilities, run 2.5 billion homes, millions of factories and businesses. Even Amazon and Apple don't have the resources to do that. So I tell people we have to be smart about this if we're going to get this done without another century slipping away. And frankly, I don't think either geopolitically or environmentally we have a century to fritter away. I don't think we have 20 years. I hate to sound negative, but
and that might be a little bit of a cushion on that 20.
Yes, if I were going to give you a date, it'd be 2036.
Yeah,
right, which is now 13 years away. So I think we need to get going on this. It's when I met with, do you remember that old senator from Arizona, Senator Barry Goldwater? He ran for president in 1964.
Mm-hmm. You do?
And look him up. Great guy. He was an arch conservative, and he was John McCain took his seat. Okay. And it was interesting because I was at his home back years ago after he retired from the Senate.
Right here.
And Barry Goldwater, great guy. Yeah. And he had me come to his house there in Scottsdale in Paradise Valley. And if you're flying to Phoenix, the terminal is the Barry S. Goldwater terminal. But he was this sort of arch-conservative senator of the 60s, ran against Lyndon Johnson in 1964, lost, obviously. And I was sitting at his home, and he and I were having a heart-to-heart. And I had an assistant with me, and he was there with his wife. And he told me this unbelievable story. I have the letter from him. We can show in this archive. And he said, well, back in the 60s, I was trying to find out about this because he was in, of course, World War II. And then he also, very interestingly, had a very close friendship with General Curtis LeMay, who got the nickname Bomb 'em Back to the Stone Age LeMay because he was one of the used nuclear weapons in Vietnam, in the early Vietnam conflict. And that's actually what caused Goldwater the election, because he was attached to that. And Lyndon Johnson had this big mushroom cloud, and that scared everyone, and that's how Goldwater lost in a landslide. Anyway, but he was friends, and he was also a general in the Air Force Reserves, and a very senior U.S. Senator, obviously head of the Republican Party, Armed Services, all these. And I asked him, I said, well, were you ever briefed on it? He says, no. I was never told anything. This is another one of my inverse witnesses, although he's passed away now. And I said, well, did you ever find out anything? He says, well, I asked General LeMay, who was, I think, Chief of Staff of the Air Force at the time. He said, Curtis, I want to get into the Blue Room at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is where a lot of the extraterrestrial material was shipped to be studied, reverse engineered, productized. And Curtis LeMay turned to him and said, God damn it, Barry, I can't get into that area anymore. And if you ever ask me about this again, I will personally see that you are court-martialed out of the Air Force Reserves.
Unbelievable.
This to a sitting U.S. Senator and a general in the Air Force Reserves. And I said, well, I asked Senator Goldwater, I said, well, was he joking? He says, no, it was serious. It's a heart attack. I never brought it up again. So that one little story. It's apocryphal, but that little one story multiplied thousands of times in my meetings with people
is the problem
at that level around the world, not just here, but Australia, Canada, other countries. It's a huge problem because you have someone who absolutely had the need to know as a candidate for president, but also as a senior senator on these key committees. And when he did inquire, his good friend was just said, don't ever bring this up. It's like, you're dead, man. You're done. And I've had many, many high-ranking people say similar things to that. And this is sort of my education as a young doctor going around when I was, doing this in my, quote, spare time, which I didn't have. But it was fascinating to hear the consistency of that threat proffered to very senior people in the government here and elsewhere. So
when everybody's saying the same thing over and over, it's no longer BS anymore.
Yeah, you get a pattern. If you had one data point like that, this is an embellishment. When you have 100, and this is what I always tell people who are reporters and skeptics and alleged scientists at Harvard. Have you read the disclosure book? I mean, there's like 70 top secret people with their name, rank. We have their DD-214s, their discharge forms from the military. We have the radar tapes. We have the photographs of these objects.
That's what I don't understand.
It's like, okay, what are you waiting for? Now, suddenly the TTSA and Elizondo, we have this Tic Tac. I'm going, we have things 1,000 times better than that, but nobody. The problem is that people fall into a DDT. That's the NSA term for, yes, it was a pesticide. But a DDT operation is where you set up it's a great concept for people to get their minds around. You set up a distraction, a decoy, and the decoy becomes a distraction from where people ought to be looking.
Right.
And then it trashes their interest. It's a DDT. And there was a guy who used to be the right hand to General Odom, who was the director of the National Security Agency. He was on my team before he passed away. And he said, that's exactly what we do all the time. We just run a DDT on people. So what's happening now with the Congress being gaslit, the media, is that they have a big DDT operation being run on them. And they don't know it yet. Some do, actually. Some of the senior people in the government do know.
Well, hopefully we can get all of this out and a lot more people do.
Yes.
Now, the last two things for you, because I got to make sure you come back, and I don't want to drive you nuts. And I know you got other talks to do and everything else,
do.
right?
Yes, I have a meeting later.
Are they mostly coming from the Milky Way galaxy? Or are they coming from even further?
Oh, further.
Holy shit!
Much further. There are obviously there are 100 billion or so star systems in our galaxy, but our galaxy is one little speck amongst.
We're a marble.
Yeah,
No, I wouldn't even say a marble, a sand.
Yeah. So those 100 billion, but some are, and we think we know where some of them are coming from. But like if you look at Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, which is a documentary we did about contacting, all this is very visionary and fun. And people want to do this. You can get this app called the CE5 Contact app, and it trains you to do this. And you can form your own CE5. Or a Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind is when you deliberately make contact with these craft and their civilizations. But the one that is the photo, if you remember from Joshua Tree National Park from a few years ago, that he's floating in the desert. You get a photograph. A whole series of things happened. We don't have time to go into it. Led to this. But that particular group was from the Andromeda Galaxy, which is our nearest twin galaxy. It's a spiral galaxy. It's very similar to the Milky Way, a similar size. So it's sort of a twin galaxy of ours. But that civilization was from Andromeda. So, but remember, once you understand that we're not dealing with linear time, space,
Right.
we're dealing with, it's like you take a piece of paper, like a map of a star map, and if you were to fold the paper and those two stars that could be, a million light years apart, boom,
In an instant.
you're right there. Very
Right there.
So it may not be quite instantaneously. I think there is a little bit of a drag and corrected for real time, but no, it's so people need to reconstruct their thinking and think more like a quantum holographic universe. It's conscious. That's how cool. It is a conscious quantum hologram, where the whole cosmos is not only conscious, but it's holographic, meaning that every point in the cosmos, it has kind of folded within it, transdimensionally,
Dimensions.
the rest of it, all of it. So it's all enfolded. So now we're trained to think in this straight line Newtonian thinking, but the real, quantum physics for the last 100 years has unraveled a lot of this. What people don't understand is that a lot of that physics that's on the particle level can be put on the macro level, where an entire spacecraft with everyone on it can be like that, entangled, as they call it.
When I have deja vu, am I slipping into another dimension?
Well, you may be just simply connecting off the linear timeline. Okay, so the other thing to realize is that in the conscious field, it actually is not bound or limited to space-time, linear space-time.
Right.
So we're conscious. You're awake, I'm awake, everyone's awake. That not what you're aware of, but the consciousness itself is actually operating on a very deep level that transcends and is not limited to any point in space-time. So a lot of experiences like that, where there's a precognitive dream or an intuition or what have you, is derived from just the basic nature of consciousness.
And then with the Joe Rogan podcast that they took off Spotify, do you think that was just one they didn't want on, or do you think it was because, that was 2013, or do you think it was because of the information that you were speaking of?
Oh, I think it's the information.
Yeah, that's what it has to be.
Look, you get $100 million, there's a quid pro quo. I don't know the insides of that. I can only speculate honestly, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think this is the other thing that needs to change. I think artists and media people need to not compromise with corruption. They should say, no, this information, it needs to be available to the public, and I'm not going to sell my soul to the devil. But, look, I'm on thousands of shows. I just move on. I can't worry about it, and if they ban me, they ban me. So what?
Whatever.
It wouldn't be the first time.
Right, if it was nothing new.
Take a number.
got
Take a number.
Take a number. You got anything, Rob?
Oh man, that's amazing stuff. I know it's quiet over here. A lot of this stuff does go over my head, and I listen to it. It's some of it's hard for me to grasp, but it's unbelievable just hearing it.
He was like this with Beta. I would look over and he would just, because usually he's very talkative, you know. And when Robert Beta was in it, when he was breaking down, you know, space-time continuum and this and that and the whole other thing.
I can't I don't know how to explain it. I can comprehend it, but I can't comprehend it at the same time. It just,
don't worry.
it's amazing to me.
My wife says the same thing, and we've been married. And we've been married 44 years.
No,
so.
it really is interesting, but it's some of the stuff, and you saying some of this stuff really opens your eyes, and you're like, wow, you know, it's real.
Yeah.
And the stuff that's going on between the higher powers, as I call them, or the black state, or whatever people want to call it, is scary. It's scary.
Well, it is, but I think I always leave on a hopeful note, and here it is. I live down the road from Thomas Jefferson's house near the University of Virginia, and we the people, and the power collectively of people coming together. Everyone looks at these powerful interests as these giant, all-powerful boogeymen. I don't. I actually see the power actually is with the people, and that if enough people understand what's at stake, what the implications are, and why we need to come together to find a way out of this situation, we can do it, even if these very powerful interests don't want it to happen. Because look at the history. I mean, I grew up in the South in the 50s and 60s and the Civil Rights Movement. I was almost killed and hit by a car because I had a black girlfriend, literally. I mean, that was how racist.
Yeah.
So, and I tell people that didn't happen because the Kennedy brothers wanted to pass that. They wanted it to go away. But a grassroots movement made it happen. It's called the Civil Rights Movement and Martin Luther King. So the changes that happen over in society never happens from the center of power. The center of power, they want to maintain the status quo, always.
Yep.
But if we're going to make a change this big, it means it has to come from us.
Even medically, they want to keep the status quo.
Correct. And that's why, you know, big breakthroughs in natural medicine and
they don't want that.
I started this group in North Carolina, the Shambhala Institute, to do more holistic. Even though I'm an emergency doctor, you know, I talk about meditation and diet and this and that and, you know, other body therapies and all kinds of things. So, you know, closed-minded people or vested financial interests are always going to try to keep things as they are or tinker around the edges. But a big change like this that has been forestalled for 100 years, to make that happen, it's got to be a lot of us pulling on that oar and rowing together. I think people are mistaken if they think a U.S. president or some other leader is going to make this happen. I think it'll only happen if the people make it so. And I've witnessed this in my 67 years on this planet so many times. Same thing, you know, with all kinds of issues. I mean, Gandhi broke away from the British Empire nonviolently, just with nothing. And look what happened. So I same thing with Nelson Mandela. I think we have to look at how society evolves and changes. And most people, they're always looking at someone else will do it. It's like the Little Red Hen, you know, that book when you were a kid. Someone else will cook it and do it. No, it's going to take a lot of people putting their efforts together. But I'm convinced that it's doable. I wouldn't be doing this. I'm not a foolish person. If I didn't think this was possible, I would have retired. But I do think it's possible. I think it's difficult. It's a very heavy lift, but we can do it. And I think the stakes are so beautiful. If you look at the future, the last part of the lost century, we have these motion graphics showing the future 20, 50, 100, 200, 1,000 years from now. No pollution, no poverty. Everyone can live off the grid. Everything has its own power source. Even every refrigerator, whatever you have uses electricity, it has its own version of a zero-point generator in it. And we move into a civilization where we're no longer fighting over things and material things because there's a superabundance of things. But that's not the issue. And then our civilization can turn to what it really ought to be doing. You know, creativity, spiritual development, higher states of consciousness, travel across the cosmos. I mean, there's all kinds of things.
Cool stuff.
And
they can make plenty of money building those things.
And but no one's going to need money. See, this is it's a post it's a paradigm, and I've seen this where if you can have anything you want because it's like a Star Trek replicator.
Right.
And
You're
boom,
saying
there it is. And that's absolutely possible. Then what are you money grubbing about? This is why I take this. We need at this stage of our society. I need people with money to support what we're doing. But in the long run, we're going to eventually. Now this is going to be generational. Probably 5 generations from now, we will move into a civilization that is just post-materialistic.
That would be unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you come in before June. If not, again to promote it.
Right.
We'll talk just about it. Do you think they planted us here? Do you think other life planted us here, or do you think life was here and left here to other planets because shit was going crazy? Do you think they had anything to do with the ice ages? A lot of questions at once at the end, but I just had to ask.
Yes, no. I think there's no question that Homo sapiens are, in part, from involvement with civilizations before us. There's certainly an evolutionary gap that just bioevolutionary doesn't explain. On the other hand, I also think that there have been civilizations that predate Homo sapiens, humans,
Right.
that have been on this planet. There's strong evidence for it. In fact,
190,000 years ago.
oh no, we're talking millions of years ago.
Wow.
And I have a guy who works under contract CIA, but through IT&T, who occasionally, when they find one of these ancient artifacts, and we're talking hundreds of thousands to millions of years old, and it's a technological device.
Wow.
Some of them are of extraterrestrial origin, some are not. And so there's clearly, I mean, this guy has a very high, he has 5 shepherds, which are the people who hold your top secret clearances, and I've met with one of them. So there's no question that there's the history of this planet is complex and beautiful. And look, there's been life on Earth for 700 million years. Humans have been around in any form we're in now, maybe a few 100,000. If you count Lucy, 2 million. So obviously, there's a lot to discover, even about the history of the Earth, and I find that all very interesting. What I'm more concerned about is not ending the evolutionary path we're on by.
Good point.
So I try not to divert too much into the weeds. Sure. Because I try to triage. Speaking as an emergency doctor, I look at all of this and go, all very interesting, but that doesn't get me. We need to be focused on, where we are right now, because, like the Chinese expression, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going.
Yeah.
But look at where the hell we're going. I mean, we need a course correction, like pretty soon. Yeah, right.
All right. So when's the movie documentary coming out?
June 6th of this year.
And where can we donate?
At thelostcenturyfilm.com.
Okay, and I'll have all that in there and everything, and I support you, and I'll be there in June, as will Rob, with our mouse going like this.
Oh, yeah, you should be there at the conference. You should be at the National Press Club and just do a podcast from in there.
I'll do it all.
Wouldn't that be fun?
I'm super into this. Ever since, I'm super into this stuff.
Yeah.
And just thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you again.
Great seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you.